Thank you. This is the City of Boulder Planning Board meeting for October 3rd, 2023. Meeting's called to order. Our first order of business will be public participation. Vivian, do we have anybody who has shown up who would like to speak in public participation?
I don't see any hands, but in the meantime, I can read the rules for engagement, and then we give folks a chance to raise. And ML, you can also kind of practice maybe muting and unmuting, and we can see if that's working. Okay, so thanks, Devin, for pulling up the slides. And I just wanted to start off by thanking everyone from the public who's joining us today. We really do appreciate that you are taking your time to attend planning board meetings. My name is Vivian, and my role in these meetings is to facilitate the public engagement portion. And the rules I'm sharing are in place to help us achieve a balance between transparency with community members and security that minimizes disruptions. So after I read this, we'll start with open comments from community members to raise any issues or share comments that are not related to items on today's agenda. And we want our participants to know that the city is really striving into a vision co-created by city staff and community for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. And we worked with the community to develop these expectations for meetings. And the vision is really designed to promote free conversation and dialogue while also recognizing that we want to make sure everyone who's participating feels emotionally and physically safe and welcome. And we want to ensure that we make space for different viewpoints in our meetings because we believe it leads to more informed decision-making. Next slide. And there is more information on our website about the Productive Atmospheres vision, and I'm going to narrow in on what we need to know for tonight's meeting. There are a number of rules of decorum in the Boulder Revised Code, and we have some general guidelines that are advisory in nature. We ask that all remarks and testimony raised tonight be related to city business. We will not allow any participant to make threats or use any other forms of intimidation against any person in this session. Obscenities, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts the meeting or otherwise makes it impossible for us to continue is prohibited. And we do also ask that participants identify themselves by their first and last name, so we can call on you by your full name when you would like to speak. We're in the Zoom webinar format, and this allows participants from the public to speak at designated times, but we will not be turning on video for community members because of security concerns in this platform. There's no pre-existing list for signing up to participate today during open comment or for the public hearing item later. So if you're in the meeting, we welcome you at the appropriate time to raise your hand, and you can do this by going to the horizontal menu at the bottom of the screen, and there are 3 clickable items. So look for the hand icon, and it'll raise a hand next to your name, and then we'll know to call on you. If you have an expanded menu, you can also get to raise hand by clicking on reactions, and I will monitor to see if anybody is joining us from the public by phone and provide those instructions later if needed. Okay, so this would be the time when you can raise your hand to speak. And I just wanted to also remind you that there is a Q&A function if you have a question about the process or the technology, but it is not meant for side conversations regarding agenda items, for example. So there's only one hand raised. That's member of the public, Lynn Siegel. So go ahead, Lynn, and you would have 3 minutes, and Devin will pull up the timer.
So you just made me late for my Empower Hour Candidates Forum on Climate and Energy by reading the rules that someone can check off easily. How many tens of thousands of hours have been spent reading rules? This is utterly archaic that the city of Boulder, a supposedly progressive place, is reading the Riot Act to every person who's trying to speak. Stop it. Just stop. What a waste. And wasting my time at an energy forum. Why do you do that? Why? Because the higher ups tell you? You tell the higher ups because you're the
Lynn, why
leader.
don't you get to your point, please, instead of complaining? We're very happy to hear what you have to say, but
Because
you've said the
I
same
want to
thing.
complain and I have a right to complain. Sorry. Sorry if you don't like it, Sarah.
It's just
But
not an efficient use
I'm
of your
sick
time,
of-
Lynn.
I'm sick of doing it. I'm sick of doing it, and you never listen and you never change it, do you?
That's not true,
Just
Lynn.
like you
Please
don't
go ahead.
change about more efficient housing. And I'll tell you how you do efficient housing. In Seattle, I went up to the Mountaineers Lodge. You sign up for set up and serve or whatever at the lodges where you go skiing. You're in a dorm. So there's not individual bedrooms. You know, if you're lucky and you go early enough, you don't get toilet duty. You get set up and serve or buying food or something to help with the whole communist kind of thing, you know, but it worked really well, really, really well. And that's the kind of affordable, truly affordable housing that you need to do in Boulder. If this is such a friggin' progressive place, why aren't you? Why are you instead talking about the smaller and smaller you can get, the more and more the developer gets? Why is that? I don't understand. In an insatiable market, in an inelastic market, there's only one thing that goes up when you get smaller, and that's the income for the developer. It doesn't help anyone. And larger places that are shared do. And if people don't want to live that way, well, then they can pay the higher price. But why don't you offer that option to people instead of offering them up to the developer who inflates the value of all the properties? And people like me have to go and fight at the Board of Equalization now, and later the Board of Assessment Appeals for the $3,000 that my taxes went up from $5,500 to $8,500 a year. And my insurance just went up from $1,600 to $3,500. So think about
Thank
that.
you, Lynn. Please wrap it up.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thanks, Lynn. Okay, is there anyone else, Vivian?
Nope, no other hands for open comment.
Okay. Next will be discussions of dispositions, planning board call-ups and continuations, of which there are none. So we will go right to the public hearing item. I see that ML is actually here, which is wonderful. We see you versus being on the phone. Hello. All right, so this agenda item, which I'll read in a second, we've set aside 15 minutes for staff presentations, then we'll have Q&A. We want the staff to get through the presentation, then Q&A, clarifying questions from the board, then a 15-minute applicant presentation, and then a 45-minute board discussion. And just a reminder, it's a concept review, so we're talking about things we do and don't like. But we're not voting on anything. Okay, so this is concept plan review and comment request for a mixed use proposal to develop 5450 Airport Boulevard with 147 attached dwelling units and 2,000 square feet of non-residential space in 4 3-story buildings. 117 of the 147 units are proposed as efficiency living units. This is reviewed under case number LUR 2023-00026. And Shannon, please take it away.
All right, wonderful. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? And can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yay, awesome. Okay, so good evening, Planning Board members. I'm Shannon Moeller with the City of Boulder Planning Department. I'm excited to get your feedback on tonight's concept plan. So I'll briefly cover the information in staff's memo, the purpose of a concept plan, the existing site conditions and surroundings, the proposal itself, and some key issues. So again, the purpose of the concept plan review is to review a general proposal and help identify key issues in advance of a more detailed site review submittal. So the applicant will receive comments from the planning board, staff, and the public. And as Sarah said, no formal action is being taken tonight on the project. Public notification was provided in terms of written notice, and notice was posted on the property. Staff did not receive any public comments on this proposal. Moving to the site itself, this is located south of Airport Boulevard, and it's accessed via an easement across the neighboring lots to the north. Here you can see the property consists of Lot 3D, which is 4.29 acres, and Outlot A, which is 3.31 acres. It's bordered by existing developed properties in the Lake Center Business Park to the west, north, and east. The Boulder and Left Hand and North Boulder farmers ditches run through the site through Outlot A, and there's a dedicated open space and scenic trail easement along the ditches. Further south to the southeast is the San Lazaro Mobile Home Park in unincorporated Boulder County. There's the Sterling Court Industrial Park to the south. The Valmont Bike Park is just to the southwest, and the Boulder County Jail Facility is further east, as well as the municipal airport just to the northwest. So this property was approved as a part of prior site reviews that also approved the buildings immediately to the west. And development was approved on this site 3 different times through the site review process between 1997 and 2018, but no building has ever been constructed here. The buildings to the west consist of 2 29,000 square foot 2-story buildings that are occupied by Blue Canyon Technologies. And the building just to the north is an 81,000 square foot building with 3 levels over 1 level of parking occupied by Also Energy and Scaled Agile. The buildings are brick and glass and designed to fit into an office industrial park setting. They're surrounded by parking and landscaped areas. Since Lot 3D was never developed as previously approved, it's vacant, but there are some items on the site like curb cuts into the property, a parking area, some retaining walls, partially constructed pedestrian walkways, underground utility infrastructure, and some associated easements. And then Outlot A to the south contains an existing stormwater detention facility, and again, those easements and the scenic and trail easement previously mentioned. There is significant topography on this site. It slopes down from north to south at least 30 feet and contains multiple retaining walls. This in turn allows for significant views facing toward the south and southwest. In terms of transportation, the site is accessed again from Airport Boulevard and then through that access easement across the lots to the north. The nearest transit stops from this property are located at the intersection of Valmont and Airport, so over a half-mile walking distance, and there's limited bus service at those locations. The Transportation Master Plan calls for multi-use path in the scenic and trail easement through this site, and that is planned to connect to Valmont Bike Park. There is a missing link on this triangular property to the southwest in between. The subject proposal includes adding the multi-use path connection on the property itself. In terms of the BVCP, the Lot 3D is designated light industrial that allows for light industrial uses, as well as other residential and other appropriate complementary uses, at appropriate locations. The outlot is subject to that scenic and trail easement, so it's appropriately designated open space, development rights, and open space other. The property is in the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan area adopted in October 2022. The designations in the East Boulder Plan are consistent with the comp plan. The property was not designated as an area of change where new walkable neighborhoods were specifically identified. Subsequently, earlier this year, as part of the Use Table and Use Standards Project, Module 2, that focused on industrial areas, the code was updated in regard to regulations for residential uses in the industrial zones. Residential uses have been permitted in IG and IM zones since 2004 through approval of a use review. Only 4 residential projects have been approved through that process. Earlier this year, as part of the Use Table project, Council supported maintaining, existing, and expanding the number of industrial zone properties in the city that would be eligible for residential uses via a use review. So this added some new standards to allow for residential and industrial based on subcommunity and area plans, proximity to Boulder Junction, and continued to allow residential uses on a parcel that meets the 1/6 contiguity requirements. The subject parcel would meet the contiguity requirements to the open space easement to the south, and thus it would be eligible to request a use review for residential uses. So again, in terms of the zoning, this property is zoned IM, industrial manufacturing, and so it would require a use review for the residential portion of this proposal. So moving to the proposed project itself, this is a proposal for 4 3-story buildings. It would have an approximately 17,000 square foot office component, about 2,600 square foot of restaurant/retail, 147 dwelling units, of which the majority would be ELUs, or efficiency living units. Those are defined as units that are 475 square feet or less, as well as 2 one-bedroom and 28 two-bedroom units. And it would also have proposed a 15 to 16% parking reduction for this proposal. As you can see on the site plan, there are 2 vehicular access points on the west end of the site, as well as a vehicular connection at the northeast corner to the property to the north. Pedestrian access into and through the site is largely attached sidewalks adjacent to parking areas. The proposal does show the construction of the planned multi-use path along those ditches and connections from the site down to that path. Here again is the architectural images that the applicant provided. Building A over toward the west end of the site, buildings B and C toward the middle, and then building D is located at the east end of the site. Moving to required processes. So following tonight's hearing, the applicant would need to file for a site review amendment, and the parking reduction request could be considered as part of that. And it would also require that use review for residential and industrial areas. If those were approved, it would then move on to technical documents and easements and that sort of thing. So for key issues for tonight, staff identified 3 key issues, and I'll go through those quickly. The first one was if the proposal is compatible with the goals, objectives, and recommendations of the BVCP. To highlight again, this proposal is located in the light industrial area. This does allow for residential and other complementary uses in appropriate locations and refers to policy 2.21, light industrial areas, where additional guidance is provided. Staff identified the following policies in the memo and provided more detail and analysis of these policies therein. The first 3 staff felt that the proposal was consistent with in terms of providing infill and a compact development, providing those trail linkages, and providing a balance in terms of providing housing. The bottom group of policies, staff was recommending revisions to the proposal to better meet those policies. Because this proposal is located largely in an industrial park setting, staff recommended revising the proposal to really provide more of that neighborhood feel and really needing it to provide a neighborhood in of itself, since there really lacks a lot of things in the surrounding area that folks would need. Again, referencing policy 2.21, light industrial areas, very important to provide and go through each of the subcategories of that policy. Policy 2.36, physical design for people, just providing more of that pedestrian-oriented design. 2.37, environmentally sensitive design, really showing how the proposal and the site design itself provides more of that environmental sensitivity. And then again, enhanced design for all projects, where we'd be looking for the proposal to kind of create that neighborhood, establish a neighborhood feel, create its own sort of relationship to the public realm, where it really does not have a public realm right now, providing really ample transportation in terms of the TDM and as much transportation connections as possible, since it is located in a challenging location out there along Airport Boulevard, showing how the parking is well designed and integrated into the site, And again, the on-site open spaces, how those are going to serve folks that are living there, especially folks that are going to be in more of an ELU type living situation. Key issue 2 was for feedback on the proposed mix of uses. Again, these were the mix of uses that were proposed. And again, it would require that use review for residential and industrial. So staff was looking for planning board's feedback on the proposed mix of uses. Staff looked at seeing how the design could best address the predominance of ELUs that are really making up the bulk of the units on this site, and how the site could best provide for on-site services and amenities. In policy 2.1, 2.21, there's references to really providing those on-site services and amenities that aren't typically available in an industrial area. And then again, just showing how the proposal relates to that open space to the south. The proposal is eligible to request a use review due to its contiguity to that open space and how it relates to that, we felt was important. And then moving to key issue 3 was we'd love to get feedback on the overall conceptual site plan and architecture. Again, looking at these items in terms of the site design and building design. We looked at the new site review criteria that this project would be reviewed under, several of the items under access and transportation, trying to show how the proposal really addresses the needs of folks, that they don't have to necessarily depend on the automobile, how it could best provide a pedestrian-oriented environment and minimize the amount of pavement. And then in terms of the open space, again, really showing how it's going to meet the needs of the folks that the units are designed to serve. And then lastly, in terms of the building, siting, and public realm, how those buildings can be created in more of a streetscape type of design and the relationship of parking to those buildings. In terms of next steps, this item is eligible for call-up consideration by City Council. Then the applicant would then proceed with taking this feedback and submitting applications, or could possibly submit a new concept plan review application if they so desired. The application would be reviewed under concurrent site review, amendment, and use review applications, and it would be a staff level decision that would be subject to call up by the planning board. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you so much, Shannon. Really appreciate it. If anyone on the board has clarifying questions, now would be the time to raise your electronic hand and I'll call on you. Okay, Laura, then ML.
Thank you, Sarah. Shannon, thank you for that speedy but very thorough presentation, and for the packet. I thought it was very well explained. My question has to do with the relationship and hierarchy between the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan and the changes that were made to the use tables. And I recall feeling, and it may have just been me, some confusion about whether the contiguity requirements that were done in the use tables update would trump any subcommunity or area plans, because we spent 3 years trying to define the areas of change in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. But it sounds like staff's interpretation is that that change that was made by City Council to the use tables to allow industrial in more areas to transfer over into or evolve into residential trumps the subcommunity plan. Is that what I'm hearing?
Generally, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, the plans are more of policy level guidance that then is implemented through those changes to the zoning code. And so what happened through those use table changes were the regulatory changes that went into effect to the zoning code.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand.
Yes.
You done, Laura? Okay, ML and hold on a second. ML and then Kurt and then Mark.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And thank you so much, Shannon. It was a very thorough and well done packet. I really appreciate your analysis. So I think, and this was just at the end of your presentation, am I understanding that the use review and whatever other requirement might be coming up will be done at a staff level? And it won't come back to planning board? Unless we call it up? Is that correct? Oh, there it is. So
Yeah,
the
so
site
this,
review agreement and use review, so the use review won't come back automatically.
yeah, it does not come back automatically. It would be subject to call up. There could be a situation where, depending on, like, say, if a height modification was added into the proposal or something of that nature, that it might be a mandatory planning board public hearing. But outside of a situation such as that, it would be a staff level decision subject to call up. That's correct.
And because the parking requirement is such a low one as well.
Yes,
Or
if the parking
reduction, yeah.
yes, if the parking reduction changed so that it exceeded 50%, then it would be a mandatory public hearing for planning board. That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Kurt and then Mark.
Great, thank you very much. Shannon or anybody else on staff, do you have any feel for why the previously approved industrial projects were never constructed? Do you have any historical information on that?
I don't. Yeah, the most recent one was approved as recently as 2018. It was a 40,000 square foot office industrial building. That might be a great question for the applicant if they have any knowledge of that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you much.
All right, Mark, your turn.
Yeah, I may ask a couple and I may come back around. As evidenced by my email earlier today and staff's response, my questions are going to focus on the connections for this site. So my first question is, have we actively pursued? Are we going to actively pursue? Why haven't we? If the answer is no, the missing link connection, which I believe from looking at the maps is owned by the Sterling Circle Industrial, the industrial park. Yep. So it seems like we have allowed the industrial park to develop, and that's a fine little industrial park. I like it. But just because of the plot, the way it lays out, it's private property and they control this missing link. So have we missed opportunities as Sterling Circle has developed to acquire an easement as part of other development rights to connect the Belmont Bike Park to the subject property? And are we doing anything about that now? Because to me, this is critical. I'll talk about my comments later. This is critical to this site. But tell me about that connection and what the status is and what we've done about it.
Yeah, so that industrial park has been platted for many years. The area with that missing link there, I did reach out to our OSMP staff to see if they had any information about this during the review process. And they had been in contact with that property owner, I believe, as recently as the past year or two, in talks regarding an easement. So I think there has been effort made in regards to that. It didn't sound like there was any current like forward progress where it's like actively happening, but I know that work has been taking place trying to connect those missing links.
So do we have a tool, a legal valid tool? And I certainly want us to operate within, all legal scope to have an applicant for one property facilitate, to actively pursue, help out with creating doing something with that sort of missing link. And again, it could just be generic. we have lots of situations like this. This is not completely unique. My question is are we prescribed that we can only discuss connections that are on a subject property in terms of development possibilities? So that's maybe a question for Laurel or someone else.
Yeah, I can try to answer and Laurel can chime in if I say anything wrong. But yeah, my understanding is from a regulatory context, from a development review context, we are only really can, extract improvements that relate specifically to the subject property itself. So we wouldn't be able to try to have them develop this other person's property with the trail connection.
Yeah, I agree with what Shannon said.
Okay. All right,
Can I colloquy on that?
please.
Does that also preclude us or prohibit us from making an approval contingent on development of a missing link on a different property? For instance, could we say, hey, this project would be great if that link existed, but it doesn't, so we're going to deny it? Is that legal?
Again, Laurel, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I think my understanding is you would have to find, or whoever the decision maker was would have to find that it didn't meet some criteria of the required approvals, such as the site review or the use review criteria, I think that's correct.
Yeah, that's correct. In order for something like that to be defensible, we have to have some sort of area in our criteria to point to say something like that.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Mark, for letting me jump in.
Sure. Well, I'm going to build on that because that really goes to the heart of this. And so.
I'm sorry, Mark, can I just remind you that these are clarifying questions and
Yeah.
you can actually bring this up when we have our discussion?
Yeah, so I'm trying to avoid, I'm trying to clarify
Okay.
what is allowed for later discussion. I definitely have thoughts on things, but I am trying to raise questions that I think should be answered. And that is, while we can't do what Kurt suggested and say condition an approval upon something that is not on a subject property, we could deny something simply because it didn't meet a criteria in the BVCP. But if the applicant ever came back and said, hey, I've solved this problem, then we could approve the project. But we could deny a project because of a failure to meet BVCP and code conditions, like lack of connections, but we can't condition it due to lack of connections to some future condition. I don't know if I'm being clear, but Laurel, Shannon, tell me if you understood that question.
Shannon, did you want to jump in, or would you like me to?
Oh, I guess the question was, if I understand Mark's question, it was the difference between conditioning something versus denying something. Okay.
Based on something that's outside the boundaries of the particular parcel.
Right, so you still have to have denial findings and say like what it is that you're denying the project for, and kind of, again, circling back to those criteria. So it all is kind of based on the criteria in the code. So when we write up those denial findings, we like list up the criteria that it doesn't meet based on your conversations and what you decide.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna stop there for a minute and let someone else take it.
Kurt?
I'm gonna follow up in a similar direction, but I have a question about really the property to the southwest. So there's this very strange, the property that the missing link goes across, it's a very strange kind of arrow-shaped parcel, as far as I can tell. It's got a big triangular head, but then it's got sort of an arrow shaft down that connects to Sterling Circle, just between the property with the red roof, which is the Boulder Potters Guild, and whatever building is to the southwest of that on this map that we're showing here. My question is, there's this very strange, narrow piece of the parcel that, as I say, goes between Boulder Potters Guild and some industrial building. And when I toured the site, I rode up to the Boulder Potters Guild. I came from the Sterling Circle side, and I walked up through that narrow area, which has a very well-defined social path on it, and then across a couple of bridges across the ditches to get up there. My question is, I guess, do you have any idea what the original purpose was of leaving this narrow, what looks like it would be some sort of an access way to between the Boulder Potters Guild and this other building? It doesn't seem like it's usable for anything else. And if we wanted to try to establish a public connection, an official connection, rather than the very unofficial connection that exists today, which requires you to go past some no trespassing signs and stuff. If we were to try to make that an official connection, what would be required? Would it be adding it to the TMP and then getting it to happen somehow? So that was a long question, and hopefully that was clear.
Yeah, I believe that would be sort of the process if there was a desire for the city to try to make that connection. Typically, it would be shown on the TMP. You're talking about kind of crossing the ditches, building a bridge in this location and crossing the ditches. Yeah. So yeah, that would most likely go through that process of being added to the TMP. And then for the city to try to acquire the access and so forth.
And the first part of the question was, do you have any idea why that property was shaped that way? Because it makes it look like it was originally thought of as a connection.
Yeah, when I looked at the plat for that subdivision, it appeared to me that kind of triangular arrow-shaped lot, as you said, it was a platted lot, and it was intended to have access off of Sterling Circle with a vehicular access point from that location. I'm assuming it has not been developed, since it would be rather expensive to construct a bridge across the ditches to get to the small piece of property that exists beyond the ditches. So it seems like a difficult property to develop, as you said. So that was my understanding when I kind of looked at the plat for that industrial park down there. Again, in terms of the subject property we're talking about tonight, I think just going back to the regulatory standpoint, since this project, there is a need for this missing link connection, this subject property probably would not be the property that's creating that need. We would definitely like to see it connected and so forth. I think we would have difficulty extracting or basing a decision off kind of these offsite improvements. We typically try to avoid making requirements based on those, but we did want to point it out in the staff memo, since it is kind of a missing link next to this property.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
Okay, last call for questions. None seen. All right, Shannon, thank you. Time for the applicant to please appear on screen. Hello. I see some markers showing up who must be the applicants. If you all could, there you are, there's one. It says, is your father or brother going to be joining you visually?
No, I'm gonna be making the presentation.
Okay, great. So you'll have 15 minutes to do so. So please go ahead.
All right, let me share my screen here. Okay, does everyone see my shared screen?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. All right, well, my name is Jason Markell. I'm Vice President of Markell Homes, and wanted to thank Shannon for such a thorough and thoughtful presentation. That was outstanding. Markell Homes has been building in the city of Boulder for 50 years now. And, we're committed to working with planning board, city council, staff, and our professionals to enhance our project in every way possible. We believe SketchPlan is the quintessential platform to incorporate outside ideas and share our project's vision and site constraints we've been designing around. We are emboldened with rates at 8%, commercial properties on the decline, and Boulder County's housing crisis to contribute, address, and add to the attainable housing in the city through thoughtful design. Some of the projects we have collaborated on with the city include Dakota Ridge Village, Northfield Commons, Calmia 38, Northfield Village, Calmia Court, and Keller Farm. In addition to our City of Boulder projects, we have a lot of projects in the Boulder County, such as North End, West Grange, Silver Creek, Blue Sky, White Hawk Ranch, and Lions Valley Park. So almost 100% of our building throughout the last 50 years, takes place in Boulder County. So we're a true, locally owned and operated local builder here. And I think you'll see that contributes to our, thoughtful design and accountability to the residents here. So part of that accountability is, we hold ourselves to high standards, including design, community enrichment, and high efficiency, high performing building practices. We believe in leading by example and are recognized in the Front Range as a leader in green building, high performing homes. And some of our, awards are the U.S. Green Building Council, LEED Leadership Award, Indoor Air Plus Leadership Award, the Best of Boulder Builder Award, and, Guildmaster Award for Service Excellence. So, with our project at Lake Center near the airport, we plan to continue our sustainable and green building practices here. And with our southerly orientation, we're excited to take advantage of the passive southerly orientation with our, large roof overhangs. And I wanted to, reiterate the presentation staff delivered, or sorry, I don't want to reiterate, the presentation staff delivered. Instead, I wanted to shine a light on our design objectives, site constraints, and features to show how we arrived at our plan and are looking forward to future improvements. Our project is located near the Valmont Bike Park and Boulder Airport, taking advantage of the city's wishes of building more projects in light industrial areas. This is not the first project of our kind. The Velo community 4 blocks away from us successfully paved the way with a residential neighborhood in a light industrial area. Like Velo, we too have an adjacent residential county property. And keep in mind that this is not a downtown project. Considering our location, we have identified a need for attainable housing and cost-conscious planning. Along these lines, we need adequate parking and transportation amenities for our residents to travel to and from work each day. We plan on introducing Zip electric cars, battery-powered e-bikes, and battery scooters for last mile connectivity. And with that in mind, we think, bikeability is sort of the new walkability with all the battery assisted technology out there. And so, our RTD bus stop, is a 2-minute bike ride. our Valmont, City Park is 4 minutes, 15-minute bike or bus ride to downtown, and Boulder Junction is just a 7-minute bike away. So, in years past, with what could have been, a long walk with the Lime scooters, B-bikes, and Zip cars, everything's much closer as far as connectivity is concerned. And we are talking to the Missing Link property owner. We are requesting, the city's help in addressing the property owner's wishes to add, density bonuses on adjacent properties for their help in creating the Missing Link connection. And so we're happy to facilitate this process. And I know it's in our best interest, and I think it's in the city's best interest. And I think we can make it, of interest, with the property owner as well, so that we all come away with a win here, establishing that connection. So again, we're happy to facilitate that, and are going to be working hard to make that happen. So our next slide is looking at the open space on the property. We have a large, open space that you guys have seen in previous slides. Our southerly open space, I think, is our best amenity. It's preserving the views, our Flatiron views to the southwest. And so with that, it enriches, our best amenity. And we also have 5 distinct social gathering areas on site, one in front of each building. So you'll see each building has its own, social gathering site that is independent of the others. And so we plan on kind of weaving a fabric and making each of those special in their own way. And then we also have a central park. So this park here, besides Building B, is sort of our family gathering area. And that's more of a central park, and it's going to be different from all these other, amenity locations. So staff recommended a few things in their write-up, and we read through that and considered the rooftop decks that they recommended, we think would be a great addition to the project. And so in addition to all these other, open space areas, having these rooftop decks on buildings B and C, we think would be a really amazing amenity, capitalizing on the views. And we also have, open patios in front of our mixed use building. And so with that open patio, we plan on having a restaurant on the first floor. And so having a really nice, large open patio in front of the restaurant, we think would be a really great amenity, not just for our project, but sort of weaving in the greater neighborhood. Because if you've ever been there, obviously there's a lot of, offices and workers around. And we think, a breakfast and lunch restaurant would really enhance the community feel in that area. And so one of our site constraints is that we have, topography on this lot. And so we also have an existing retaining wall running. Basically this whole red swath here is a pretty large retaining wall, and it greatly contributes to the buildability of the lot because it flattens out this whole area, which is really nice for the building construction. But what it does create is it creates a setback, and it creates it in 2 ways. One, the setback is required for engineering because we can't build right on top of the retaining wall with the pressures. And then 2, we need the setback because if we put these buildings right against the wall, the city codes and how we look at max height calculations will, the lowest point in 25 will be, 15 feet down the retaining wall. And so we'll lose a story. And so we did a, little section here to kind of show you what's happening with the retaining wall and why we need to set the buildings back. But in this lower, one, if the building was, the minimum spacing from the retaining wall, we would still, have our lowest point in 25 down near that open space, which would chop off an entire story of 3 buildings. And so we'd be losing 44 units if we did that, and we'd be losing 37 parking spaces because we'd still need to be set back from that retaining wall. So if we set it back even further so that we don't lose our lowest point in 25, we gain those 44 units, which greatly enhances the affordability of the project. And we wanted to do something in this space right here. And so within that space, we strongly believe that we need parking, in this site, and we don't want to take a large parking reduction. And so we wanted to add, parking to that site. One thing, that we are going to propose is that, we listen to staff's concerns over, the parking. And, we strongly believe that we need to mitigate, some of the hardscape. And so with this section, we wanted to show that we're committed to, in future submittals, having some more increased pedestrian environment. And in doing so, we want to have detached sidewalks from our road or alley. And so with detaching the sidewalks, we'll gain, green space, and we will add, landscape buffers and parking buffers with landscaping. And so let me go.
Jason, if I can just remind you, you have about 4 minutes left. So just FYI.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. So the section depicts advancements to the plan, in multiple ways. And one of those ways is trying to create an increased pedestrian environment by creating front porches on our ground floor units. And so we think if we can put some front porches accessing our ground floor units and possibly elevating them so that there's some privacy and, contributes to the livability of the unit, that when, people are walking by on these detached walks, we can have sort of a more intimate relationship with the building in these pictures shown above with front porches. And so we'd also want to add compact parking against the buildings to facilitate the detached walks and increase tree lawns and landscape islands to break apart, the parking hardscape and attached walks. And with that, we are also envisioning a height modification, because based on feedback from staff, we're striving to add architectural variety, and with more interesting roof forms, we can achieve that. And to add, livability, we want to increase, plate heights. And with the enhanced pedestrian environment, we'd want to elevate the first floors. So with those 3 things and factoring in the topography of the site, I think we're probably going to move forward with requesting, minor height modification in future submittals. And, in conclusion, we welcome any questions and concerns and look forward to working with you on elevating this plan for future residents of Boulder. And yeah, happy to field any questions.
Jason, very nice presentation. Is this your first presentation to planning board? I know your father.
Yeah, for the city of Boulder, we're actually pretty excited because, the last, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years, we haven't had a presence in the city. And a lot of that was due to land availability. Mm-hmm. And so, I've been making a lot of presentations to Longmont and Lafayette and Louisville. But we're excited to be back in Boulder after all these years. And look forward to working with you on this project.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Are there any clarifying questions for Jason? Kurt and then Mark.
Hi, Jason. Thank you for your presentation. I had asked staff about the history of the failed industrial projects on the site. I'm just wondering if you have any feel for why those failed. Was it anything to do with the site per se, or was it just external factors? Do you know anything?
I think it was a combination of the decline in commercial viability of projects. And so I can't really speak to, Reynolds' exact, thing. But what I do know is that, it'd been for sale for quite some time. And, we are identified, an opportunity, to capitalize on the new light industrial changes and sub area plans. And so, we decided to, make a go of it. And, it required almost a year's worth of sort of investigating different avenues to make it happen, and, working with staff and doing our pre-apps. And so, luckily, we were able to achieve our contiguity and sort of facilitated a residential project in this area.
Okay, thank you. One other quick question. Your proposed plans show an access to the northeast. Is there also an access easement on that northeast side through the adjoining property?
Yeah, so let me see if I have site plan here. Okay, there we go. So here's our main entry over here. And then we have this topography in here is a little robust. And so, you can enter here, and then we have a easement taking you around this building. So you kind of come up and around this building, which gives us our secondary egress.
Okay, so there are easements on both sides.
It's on both sides. And so, when Reynolds platted that, he had that, in the replatting of the property.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Mark and then ML.
Hi, thank you, Jason. My first question involves the mix of unit types. And what market signals are telling you that in this location, in this time, 117 ELUs and I forget how many 2 bedrooms is the right mix? And do you perceive the potential that the ELU boom is a bit of a bubble, and sometimes people way on the outside can kind of see a bubble, but sometimes people on the inside don't see it. But so my question is what makes you confident that this is the right product mix at this site at this time?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We see it in our adjoining neighborhoods in other communities such as Lafayette, Louisville, and Longmont. There's the affordability crisis, is ever present in Boulder. And so, we even see it, in Longmont and Louisville and Lafayette, and people are struggling, to stay in those areas, much less Boulder. And so, we thought, when we look at our demographics that, ELUs are sort of that missing link to keeping, workers here in Boulder. And so if people are having to, travel to Longmont and even, Decano, then there's an obvious, crisis going on. And, there's some, parcels of land are better suited for, families and, maybe the missing middle. And some parcels we believe are, better suited for, workforce housing. And we've sort of identified this parcel as one that would probably be, a better, more, workforce-esque, housing initiative. And so that's why we decided to sort of double down on our ELUs.
Okay. You said, and rightly, that, hey, we are taking advantage of code changes that we, in the not distant past, adopted and city council adopted, allowing residential development in the IM IG zones. And my question is, do you perceive that the code is somehow, does the code somehow drive you to ELUs, or is the code completely independent of that? But your perception as a developer, is the code driving you to ELUs?
I don't believe the code's driving us to ELUs. I think our location, is driving, more the ELU thought process. But, I think obviously, Boulder has the capability to, build very high end. And, I think that might be disingenuous to address a housing crisis to just build super high end units here. And so that's sort of the impetus, is one, trying to address a housing crisis, two, acknowledging, your location, and that, you don't want to necessarily overbuild in an area that might not support, crazy price per square foot units. And so, I think it's sort of a multitude of factors that are sort of leading us in that direction. But, what we have done in the past is, we've built hundreds of affordable units in Boulder, and, most of our communities over the years, have addressed, sort of, affordability, missing middle, and obviously, to pay for all of that, we've had some, market rate, paving that way. But I think on this property, we've identified it as, a prime candidate for ELUs and workforce housing.
Okay, last thing. I appreciate your concern for market affordable workforce housing. But I still kind of, and I'm not anti-ELU and at all, but I kind of get the feeling that somehow ELUs are being typed as workforce housing. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding you, but there's a lot of the workforce out there, at least in my perception, that has families, that are married couples, kids, etc. So do you equate workforce housing more with your affordability target, or are you equating it more with the type and the mix that you've proposed to put on this site?
Yeah, I mean, we have, a fair amount of 2 bedrooms, to sort of cater to families. And with our Central Park, we will have, some amenities for children in the Central Park. And so we're not trying to, turn a blind eye to families and just cater to, I guess what you would call like, single workforce housing residents. We're thinking that, this location probably is better off with workforce housing, and we've sort of wanted to achieve an affordability. And in doing so, the larger the unit, the more expensive it's going to be. And so in addressing that, I feel like it naturally, as a sort of a market rate attainability, wants to be, smaller units. And in doing so, it just so happens to sort of fall into that ELU, square footage. But we've been designing, kind of micro units in Longmont. We've been, designing some micro units for use in Louisville. And so it's not just, that we feel like we need to address the ELU concerns in your code. It's more that, we sort of govern the affordability of the project by market rate attainability.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the presentation.
Thanks, Mark. And just a reminder, the city doesn't actually have a definition of workforce or workforce housing. It's really a tool that is, we don't know what it's a tool for. Just doesn't have, there's no definition. So ML, you're next, and then George.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, for your presentation. And I think you definitely made some points that I hadn't recognized. Just to follow up a bit on what Mark was talking about, in your applicant statement, one of the things you mentioned was, or said was, and your quote, recognizing the necessity and requirements of deed restrictive affordable units, Markel Homes is taking a proactive step by incorporating innovative non-deed restricted workforce housing, feature and efficient living units. Can you, I'm puzzled by that. You're clearly stating that we need deed restricted affordable units, and then you're saying you're addressing that by providing non-deed restricted units. First, are these units for sale? And where are they landing in the market if they are for sale?
Yeah. So, just to clarify, obviously there's a mandatory affordability deed restricted component to the project. And so I think what we were trying to say is, yes, there's a, deed restricted component to this project. But one thing that we are trying to pursue, and this is sort of what I was talking about in my last comment, was that by restricting the size of the unit, you're restricting, the price of that unit. And whether that's for sale or for rent, you are restricting that in a market rate driven, way. And so I think that's what we're trying to say is that, with this location, we can't fetch, the downtown rents or the downtown, for sale, price points. And so with having, our, square footages where they are, it's sort of a market rate initiative to have attainability, and it's will hit a different, price point than the affordable, but at the same time, it's, keeping it in check with the square footage.
So are you saying these are for sale units?
No, you know what? We have not reached that point yet. And so, we sort of pro forma it both ways, and, we're still sort of, looking into that. And I know, we'll be working with, Michelle Allen and, trying to decipher, if this is going to be for sale or for rent. But at the moment, we haven't pinned it yet.
Okay, thanks. My second question is, when you showed all of the accessibility through biking, it was through that missing link there. So is the project dependent on having that kind of connectivity?
Well, let me go back to, a slide that shows the more vicinity map. So,
right.
We have, yes, we are showing this connection, but our project comes all the way over to here. And so with battery powered, transportation, all you're doing is going straight up here and around. And that's a nice, walk that has, biking, and it's even, right sized in areas. And so, I think while this would be the preferred method to get to Valmont Bike Park, if you studied, coming from here to airport in Valmont, and you studied going, Airport Road down there, it's really not that much of a, change in distance. It's obviously preferred because you're not on the road, so it's just more friendly to bikers. But I think distance wise, it's not adding, a ton of distance. I don't think it's a deal breaker. But obviously it's something that we're going to pursue heavily, and something we'd really like to see.
And just along with that, am I understanding that you don't see this as necessarily a site that creates walkability? All of your information here is about biking and busing, not about walking.
Yeah. And, I think, what my thought is with this project is, yes, you can walk to Valmont Bike Park, but just looking at the area holistically, in these areas, I'm not sure we would be here 10 years ago. I think there's been some major advancements in connectivity between Uber and Zipcars and scooters and B-bikes, and a lot of people just owning their own, battery powered, electric bikes. And so I think the connectivity, when you look at it, needs to incorporate all the new technology that's happening in that space. And, walkability is great, when you're, downtown, but even, being over on, 30th and Pearl, there's a few things that are walkable, but I would suspect a lot of people in that area are biking to amenities instead of walking. And so I think you look over here at our site, and I think, the bikeability, is this new sort of connectivity transportation fad that's happening, or, just, an Uber away type of thing, is really lending itself to the viability of the project.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your considerations of 21st century technology mobility. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
ML. Or George, you had your hand up. Is it?
Yeah, I did, but I realized I probably had more comments than questions. I think I've heard enough. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, Kurt, we're already 15 minutes into questions. Is this a question that starts a brand new subject, or a follow-up on something? Maybe something that could be a comment when we get to our own feedback?
Well, it's a question for the applicant. It's about the restaurant, the proposed restaurant use.
Yeah, please.
I just am concerned about whether there's that's a viable use in this location. Have you done a market study to determine that would be actually viable?
I haven't done a market study, yet, but, our offices are, nearby, Black Belly, and, some other, eateries here near 55th and Arapahoe. And I sort of think it's a very similar, environment where you have like a Flatirons Deli on Central, and there's a ton of, light industrial office workers in that area. And it's sort of a, food desert, if you will. And I think, people want to sort of, stroll down and, have something that is either walkable or bikeable. And so I think bringing in an eatery, and I, when we looked at it and I've analyzed it and talked to, restaurant owners, if something is, high quality and, servicing a need, we think it'll be very successful just with, everything that's surrounding it. And so we don't have any strict, market studies, backing that claim, but just looking at how many folks, work in that area, I think it's going to be a successful venture.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jason. You can turn off your video now. We'll now open up for public comment. If there is any public comment, please raise your electronic hand and Vivian will call on you. And then as soon as that's done, we'll go right to our discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. As she mentioned, this would be the time to raise your hand for the public hearing. Please go ahead and do so, and you'll have 3 minutes to share your comments. We have 2 members of the public joining us. And no hands are raised.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So we're going to go to public comment, or I'm sorry, to our own discussion.
Oh, sorry, Sarah. Lynn Siegel has just raised her hand. Go ahead, Lynn. You have 3 minutes.
I thought you said there were 2 people. So this is a deal, real affordability. I grew up mostly in the Pacific Northwest. We had the Mountaineers Lodge or other lodges like that, where you go up for the weekend and everybody takes a job and there's dorms where people are. There's not individual bedrooms. And there's a big kitchen and everyone eats together and everyone cooks together and it works. It's very communist, just like Russia, and it works in the United States, and it has for decades and decades. And this was in the 60s, I tell you. So this is not new stuff. It's a European model, works really well. And that's what you can do for truly affordable housing. I heard Jason, he kept on saying he needs to go to, what was the name of that group that Toastmasters, because he kept on saying, Well, we don't know. We're asking questions, it seemed like to me. And there's a lot of, things going on that we don't know about. And what I'm finding is that there's a square footage per person cost of living in a place, and it's a whole lot cheaper when you have a big place that's divided among multiple people. And this is as an option. Also, when you do efficiency living units, people aren't going to stay there for long. They're going to move through because they're getting married, they're having kids. They're not, it's a short-term kind of event that's not very stabilizing for a community, that where people are moving into 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms and they're staying there. So that's a factor that never gets brought up, does it? When we're talking about stable communities and also affordable communities and also workforce housing. And I heard the term, attainable again. I was looking for my notes, sorry. And jobs housing balance. Jason was also talking about Lafayette and Louisville, and that they're doing these efficiency units. So we've already got this sprawl thing going on. And
thank you, Lynn. Thank you for participating in the public
we're
hearing.
dealing with.
Please wrap it up.
Yeah, that just proves the inelastic market that we're in is expressing itself into the other communities, and they're having workforce housing issues too. So
thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Okay, I see no other hands raised for public hearing, Sarah.
Great. All right. So again, this is not a site review, it's a concept review. So it's our opportunity to give feedback to the applicant and staff as well on elements of the proposal that we have questions about, concerns about, suggestions about. I think what we'll do is we'll go around the horn on each of the key questions, if that's all right with folks. So the first key question is the proposed concept plan compatible with the Boulder Valley Comp Plan? And I'm just gonna go around the horn, and you don't need even to raise your hands. And if I miss you, just let me know I missed you. So I'll start with Mark.
Okay. As far as this fulfilling BBCP goals, it does kind of, but there are some serious challenges here, and I think that, you know, concept review is the time to, if you're going to be speak direct, if you in a way almost harshly with an applicant, it's better to do it at a concept review than when this thing is baked and suddenly you're asking for something that is long since, the opportunity to fulfill is long since passed. So when I look at the 2.21 light industrial areas, infill should contribute to placemaking. This without really great connections to the bike park, the open space to the north, the through San Lazaro to the Laughing Goat coffee shop and post office, without really good connections, this will not be a place. I think this is a site. I spent a bunch of time out there, that making it into a place is both a design challenge and a connection challenge. And what I've seen so far, and again, this to me, this is one of these concept reviews that the applicant has chosen not to bring us something that's super far along, which either leaves it open to interpretation or it seems weak. To me, this seems like a really cool design challenge that has been, it hasn't been fleshed out very much, and so it seems weak to me. Housing should be the other under 2.21. Housing should be located near other residential uses or retail services. Well, it's not unless there's a connection over to the area I described, the post office and Laughing Goat, etc. We should encourage a richness of transportation amenities. And again, this is a concept review, so I don't see a TDM plan, but I don't really see any sort of creativity around TDM in this proposal so far. And finally, I'll just say under 2.26, in the process of considering development proposals, the city and county will encourage development of paths and trails where appropriate for recreation and transportation. Implementation will be achieved through coordinated efforts of public and private sectors. And so my input to both the applicant and staff, and I agree with almost all of staff's comments, but if we want to facilitate a development like this of a residential property like this in a solely industrial area, we have to have better coordination with public and private sectors to create a connection to this area. Otherwise, it's just going to be a weird, isolated area, and I would struggle with the idea that this is really fulfilling BBCP goals without a real effort to make those connections. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. I'm gonna go to Lisa, then George, then Laura, then Kurt, then ML. So if I forget my order, just remind me. So Lisa, you're next. No, we're not hearing you. We're not hearing you, Lisa. Okay, we'll come back around. George, you're next.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have clarifying questions for the applicant because similar to Mark, to me, this just comes across as a project where the developer got a good deal on the land, trying to figure out what to do with it, and came to us with a pretty half-baked concept that I don't think necessarily meets a whole lot of what the BVCP is trying to achieve. I don't have many comments beyond what Mark said. I think my comments are more down the road in the different parts. I'm trying to, given how challenged I am on the concept, I'm not exactly sure where to put my comments. I'm gonna hold off more until later. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, George. Laura, I said you were next, and then ML, then Kurt, then I'll come back to Lisa. Sorry, Lisa. Laura, you're next.
I'm happy to defer to Lisa if she's ready, or I can go. Okay, I can go. Yes, so I agree with Mark and George. You know, you guys know I'm a fan of residential, and I think that this project is really trying to push some boundaries and test some limits here. I think staff did a really good analysis in the packet. I would point to their analysis starting on page 19 of the most current packet, where they talk about the BVCP policies that are met and the ones that are a bit more challenged. And like Mark, you know, I'm very concerned about BVCP 2.21, the light industrial areas. You know, it is a goal of ours to preserve light industrial areas, but to allow housing where appropriate. And this policy, as well as the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, talk about housing being more appropriate in a logical pattern and in proximity to existing and planned amenities, including retail services and transit. And I think staff did a good job pointing out in the memo that that's kind of a heavy lift for this project because a lot of those amenities don't exist. And so these residents are basically living in an office park and will have to drive or bike or scooter out to get everything that they need. There's just not a lot around there. Even if one restaurant would be nice, but it's not a lot of amenities for those residents. So, you know, staff on page 22 say, overall, staff finds that the proposal to introduce a largely residential mixed-use project into the industrial and business park area is challenging from a site design and neighborhood building perspective and requires additional revisions to meet the city's site review criteria, which includes meeting the intent of the BVCP, as we just talked about. So I'll point out other things that are more detailed in the sections to come, but I do want to flag, I think it's going to be a heavy lift for this project to be anywhere near what has been described so far.
Did I say ML next? ML, I think you're next. Was that my order? Sorry.
I don't remember, but I'm set. I'm set to talk as well. I'm in you know, happily concurring with Mark and George and Laura at this point. And I would just say that, you know, to me, this project is an early adapter to the change zoning and transportation evolution, but the livability is seriously lacking. And I think that the referenced, the staff referenced BVCP policies on page 19 and 20 are, you know, it's just not responding to what the Boulder Valley Comp Plan is laying out as livability and the kinds of neighborhoods that we're looking to have built. So I think that the applicant needs to take the staff's very thorough analysis of this pretty seriously and take a look and see whether this project makes sense for this site. You know, it might come down to is just the appropriate place.
All right, ML, thank you. Kurt, and then Lisa.
Yeah, I pretty much concur with what everybody has already said. I definitely agree with a lot of the staff comments regarding the site design, and I guess we'll talk more about the site design later, but I feel that the current proposed site design does not meet BVCP policies 2.36 and 2.41. because it's just too car centric. It's buildings surrounded by a bunch of parking. I think that, well, I'll talk about that in the next section. And I'm also concerned about the restaurant use. I totally agree. There's a lot of, workers in the area, industrial uses, office uses, and so on. And there's probably demand for a restaurant, but in this location, in some obscure place down a sloping driveway off the street, I have concerns whether that would actually be viable. So that's also a big red flag for me.
All right, Kurt, thank you. Lisa, hopefully your audio is working. No, it's still not working. Grr. Are your earbuds on? Yeah, okay. Okay. How about I make my comments and you keep trying, and then worst comes to worst, type your comments into the chat and I will read them out. How's that? Oh, Lisa just did that. She said, I concur with staff and other planning board members. Thank you. If you have anything you want to add that's specific, just let us know. All right, so I also agree. I agree with Mark on the connection issues. I agree with Laura on the 2.21 issues. And it raises for me a broader policy issue that I just want to bring up for staff to consider, which is the decision made by City Council this year to allow housing in IM. I think maybe it's a step too far. I mean, I realize that they've set up criteria, but I just wonder if maybe they jumped the gun given all the other residential opportunities that now exist in East Boulder Subcommunity Plan and TDAP. I also am concerned that this project doesn't meet some of the following Boulder Valley Comp Plan goals: commitment to a walkable city, which is 2.24, and 6.05 reduction of single occupancy auto trips, because it's way out in the middle of, you've got to walk everywhere. I mean, you have to drive everywhere. The failure, it doesn't meet 6.06 transportation system optimization, doesn't meet 6.14 transportation impacts being mitigated, and 6.19 transportation infrastructure that supports a walkable 15-minute neighborhood. So those are my comments. Okay, we're going to go to question number 2, which is, does planning board have feedback for the applicant on the proposed use of mixes? I will start with George this time.
Sure. I'll look at my notes real quick. It's going to sound trite. I just don't get it, right? I'm struggling with the mix. The developer said they don't even know if it's for rent or for sale. This is obviously a for rent project. I can't imagine that you're going to sell 120 plus ELUs in this location. It just seems like an island where people are going to be driving in and out. And so for that, it just doesn't really compute to me. I understand what they're saying about affordability. To me, that's just code for maximizing the price per square foot, because they're struggling to figure out the project from a residential point of view any other way. I would urge them just to reconsider how this project is being put together from a mixed perspective.
Thank you, George. All right, Laura, and then I'll go to Kurt, and then Lisa, and then ML, and then Mark.
Thank you. As I said, I'm open to residential on this site if the applicant can rise to the challenge of all of the things that staff have advised in the staff memo. I'll point to some of those more in question number 3, but specific to key issue number 2, staff said on page 21, given the predominance of ELUs, staff is recommending that the proposal indicate how the site design addresses the unique needs of residents of ELUs. And they talk about increased gathering spaces, storage areas, and other considerations specific to the types of households expected. I think some thought needs to be given to that open space down by the farmers' ditches and how that's a huge part of your sites and how that becomes something other than just something pretty to look at as you're looking out over the Flatirons. You know, what's going on down there. I would think about that and how that can be an amenity for those residents. And yeah, also just again, emphasizing the proposal needs to incorporate on-site services and amenities serving the daily needs of residents so they don't have to be leaving the site to get everything that they need. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Kurt, I think you're next.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with Laura's analysis and largely with what George said also. I do think that housing could be an appropriate use here if there were good connections and if there were more amenities around, which may come over time, hopefully. And I don't have a big concern about the proportion of ELUs. There was just an article in City Monitor in the last couple of days talking about the rise of solo renters, that younger people are more and more inclined to rent on their own, even in very small spaces, rather than share housing. And so I think that there's going to be a growing need for that. I feel that the ditches and the open space to the south could be a great amenity. It's not a particularly great amenity if you have kids. So because of, safety concerns. So if they were units that were primarily designed for families with kids, I think you'd have to kind of wall that off, which would be a shame. But if it's designed for people who are adults, then maybe you don't have to keep it so separate and it becomes a more usable space. So, I think with some thought and some better design, it could work. Again, as I said earlier, I am concerned about the viability of a restaurant there. A restaurant is needed in the area. I don't think that this is the right place for it, unfortunately.
All right, Kurt, thank you. I think Lisa, you're next.
Let's see if this works. Can you hear me now?
Yes. I
Okay,
can hear you
great. Yeah, again, very similar to folks we've heard from before. I don't think I'm necessarily opposed to residential on the site, and I appreciate that given the value of land or the cost and value of land in Boulder and so on, that it, there's a desire to figure out how to make it work. But yeah, I also just kind of don't understand what was proposed and why, other than maximizing value, which of course is important. And I would just be looking for a better overall site design, and it's just a really, really high number of efficiency units, as other people have brought up, and there's nothing really about it that meets a need that isn't met elsewhere that I find compelling. So I'm not seeing an elevator building with single floor living and laundry and that could be desirable to older folks. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can see that, and then maybe we get some of these other units too, or patio homes or row homes or townhomes. And I realize that all of those push the value up of the property and can mess with your pro forma, but there's just nothing that compelling. And as much as I like the idea of mixed use and of like on-site services, the restaurant also doesn't make sense. Again, if it had been maybe proposed as a co-working space that also had counter service and like a cafe or something, that'd be like, oh, okay, people who work there go there, people rent some of the space. I don't know, may not be doable on that site. But yeah, I think I'm looking for something more creative and a better use of that space that also maybe brings something a little more compelling to the table, when this comes back, hopefully.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm glad you got your audio working again. ML and then Mark.
Thank you. So I think one more time, the staff got their comments spot on key issue number 2. It appears specifically regarding the proposed mix of uses. Well, there's not really much of a mix, is there? There's one restaurant and there's some office area. And the vast majority, I think it says 80% of the units are ELU. So it's not a very mixed. 3 of the buildings are complete residential. 1 of the buildings has a mix of use. So I would say that in order for it to become a true neighborhood and a residential project, you really would need to bring more amenities to the site. And I also think that the location and actual usability of the open space would need to be carefully considered. It was pointed out that the open space adjacent to building number A was the restaurant patio. So I think that there just isn't careful consideration about how are people going to live here? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how is the open space being used? There's this beautiful amenity with the creek and all of that, and there doesn't appear to be any connection to that whatsoever. With the high number of ELUs, these are adults that are going to be living here. Nobody's going to be drowning in the creek. How are people going to be using that as an amenity? So I think that there's kind of a lack of kind of sitting in the project and saying, how are people actually going to use it? And to that end, I think that the mix of uses has not been informed on, what's really going on here.
All right, ML, thank you. Mark?
I don't have anything beyond what's been said on question number 2. I've got a few comments on 3, but nothing else on 2.
All right, thank you very much. I have 2 comments. One is I think that a development up there with a majority ELUs is not a great idea. It also raises for me a policy. This project raised for me a policy question about whether our new dwelling type mix requirements are specific enough. I feel like this applicant got his dwelling type mix in there with 2 1-bedroom, 2, and it was 2 of something, 117 of something, 2 of something, and then all the rest were something else. And I felt a little bit like that was cheating. I think it may just be that we aren't specific enough about what we expect from a dwelling type mix. I think there's a lot more that could be done on this plot of land, but I think there's a more existential challenge, which is this is a plot of land that probably should not be developed until the city makes its decision about what it's going to do with the airport. Because if the city decides not to change the uses at the airport, this is going to be one of the weirder residential areas in town. If the city does decide to make some changes at the airport and go with some more residential, then then it's connecting to something else that makes it a more viable, more community. It's more oriented towards 15-minute neighborhood, a neighborhood feel. It's like connecting to other things. So it may just be that you're thinking too far ahead. You might want to end up waiting until a decision has been made about the airport. Okay, question number 3. Does planning board have feedback on the applicant on the conceptual site plan? And I'm going to start with ML this time.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Let me see. I think that one of the things that the staff pointed out was that the reason that this can claim residential use is because of its proximity to open space. And there is absolutely no relationship created to that open space. In the project site plan as it sits now. So that I think is something to take note of. Secondly, if you look at the site plan and you don't know what is being proposed, you would think it's a suburban office park. the way the parking is surrounding the building and kind of the open space, it appears to be left over. That just needs to be completely reconsidered once you realize that, oh, these are people going to be living here. And given the way the world is now, some people are going to be working and living there, right? A lot of people work from home. So I think the site plan needs to be thought through more carefully, as the comments we've been making up to this point. You know, where is this place? How do people live there? And what is their experience? So I think in general, building wise and site wise, this needs to be considered as a human-centered design project, because everything around it is office buildings, which are going to be vacant evenings and weekends. So this is the there up at the top of the hill. I would suggest that the folks, if they're going to be moving forward, I know that they, unless we call up, aren't required to come back to planning board, plan to go to DAB and get some input about the buildings, and, you know, just to tighten up the aesthetic of what might be proposed. It's kind of loose right now and in sketch form, which is totally fine. But I think the site plan needs a significant amount of rethinking if this is in fact going to become a residential development as proposed.
Right, thank you, ML. Laura.
Thank you. I want to follow up on a couple of things. That, first of all, what Sarah said about waiting until the city makes a decision about the airport. I don't know if the applicant has been tracking that, but you might want to go to the city's community conversation page on the airport if you haven't, and see the 4 designs that are being considered. At least 2 of those designs would include restaurants of their own, at least 1 restaurant, even if we keep the airport. And so you might be competing with that restaurant for customers and access kinds of stuff. But that's an interesting thought, to wait until there's a little bit more certainty about what's going to happen with that airport site before you make your design decisions and come back with a final design. As ML said, I think she raised an extremely good point about that contiguity requirement includes contiguity to open space. And I think the rationale there was, that's an amenity that residents will use. So for example, in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, there were residential areas bookending Valmont Park with the assumption that that would be a really good amenity for those residents. And right now, the open space on your site is mostly something pretty to look at. It provides a wildlife corridor. I'm sure it provides some floodplain functions, but it's unclear how it functions for the residents. And so I think that that's an important thing to look at. And then I also just want to point out a bunch of things in the staff memo. I'll try not to be too repetitive here, but in addition to talking about an on-site restaurant, they suggested a corner store might be a good option there for providing amenities for your residents, really emphasizing human-centered design. I think the word human-centered is used more in this memo than any other concept or site review that we've done as far as I've been on the board. Really needs to be human-centered, not auto-centered. Gathering spaces, hopefully indoor and outdoor gathering spaces for your residents, because this really is going to be, if it is a residential development, a tiny little island, as George said, that needs to be replete unto itself and be a place that people don't just drive in and get into their units and never talk to anybody and never do anything else until they drive out again, right? It needs to be a place where people can have some community. On page 10, staff talks about establishing that streetscape and the kind of elements that would make it a good streetscape. I'm not going to read all of those, but I thought that was a really good comment. On page 17, they talk about how your TDM plan is probably going to need to be stronger and have more stuff in it than the typical TDM plan because of the walking distance right now to the nearest transit stop. They do talk about on page 11 the last mile amenities that I think the applicant has already talked about having, such as bike or scooter share, e-bike charging, cargo bike storage, on-site car share. That's going to be really critical. And by the way, I think I heard the applicant saying they are going to ask for heights, so it would come back to us for site review. It wouldn't be a staff level application anymore. So that's good. I think we'd like to see this again. And lastly, on page 11 of the memo, staff have a recommendation about alternate building designs such as tuck under parking with units above in order to reduce the amount of surface parking and the high percentage of impermeable surfaces on the site. I did see in the staff, in the applicant packet that you wanted our input on that because you felt like that would raise the prices and not be as feasible. I do think that's something worth considering, and it sounds like with the height modification, you might be able to go there without losing a floor. So it looks like something that to try to incorporate if possible. And I will stop there. I just want to say before I give up the microphone for good, that I really do appreciate the applicant's creativity and trying to make this site really work for something that the city needs. I think it is a big challenge, but I'm glad you're doing it. And please keep going. We would like to see this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, Mark, then Lisa, then Kurt, then George.
Some of my comments are, I'll just point out again that when I look at this in relation to site design and the BVCP, and I direct this both at the applicant and the city, and their partner in the county, that we are asking a lot in the BVCP of development applicants, but we say repeatedly that, for instance, 2.25, integrating land use and transportation planning will occur through both public investment and private development. Like I said, 2.26, implementation will be achieved through the coordinated efforts of public and private sectors. And I bring this up, this site, if I'm picturing myself living there and its desirability to live there, I think I want this connection to what is a beautiful corridor to the south, to the southeast, clear to the southwest. I have almost 180 degrees of either ditch lined with trees, and we actually talk about ditches in the BVCP as being an amenity and something that needs to be coordinated with for maintenance and so forth. Right now, that ditch is choked with a bunch of small trees and would have to be maintained, but you have amenities and views and a connection, but it's almost all to the south. None of it is to the north. I don't really want to be connected to Airport Road and the jail and the other great businesses up there, but I want to be connected to the south. But that connection shouldn't be the sole burden of the applicant. That needs to involve open space and mountain parks and fulfilling the connection from 61st Street clear back west to the multi-use path. That involves working with the ditch company to create both maintenance and footpath and being able to travel and enjoy that ditch seasonally. And then of course to the southwest, you've got Belmont Bike Park, you've got the dog park. But if you can't connect there, then as ML says, there's no there. So I look to both the applicant and staff to really stretch that if this is something that is going to happen and the applicant is going to pursue this, then it really needs to be some coordinated efforts with multiple departments to achieve our BVCP goals. And the BVCP is clear that this will take something more than just staff approving an application or recommending approval. It's going to take some real major effort across parks, across transportation, open space, to make it actually something that we're proud of versus a weird little residential island in an industrial park.
Thanks, Mark. Lisa, I think you're next.
Yeah, I think similar to what I said on the last ones, I'm just not sure I have that much more to add. beyond what we're hearing from other planning board members. I think, yeah, I'll just say I think that there are a variety of interesting directions that this could go in and ways that this could be improved, and hopefully this site review is fruitful and gives the developer some ideas. Yeah, and I'll just say I'm hearing a lot of good stuff from other planning board members, and I'm not sure I have that much more to say that's new.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Kurt and then George.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're all kind of on the same page here. I agree with what a lot of people have said. I really feel that the site design needs to better embrace and address the ditches, which are a great amenity. It feels like it doesn't really acknowledge that they're there. One thing that I'm not a designer, but if I were designing this, I would not do this sort of arbitrary alignment of the buildings with the cardinal directions. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It leaves these weird little triangular open spaces that don't seem very usable. I would align the buildings, if you were just to stick with the existing buildings that you're proposing, align them with the ditches so that they're really addressing the ditches, and it gives you much more, I think, functional open space then. So that's one specific suggestion. I totally agree with Mark about the connections. I would love to also see connections, the connection that I was talking about through this weird little arrow property down to Sterling, because there are some great businesses down there. There's the Boulder Potters Guild, which is kind of cool. There's a bike shop and some other retail. There's a yoga place and a taekwondo place and stuff. There's all kinds of things actually that are quite close and walkable, but they're not currently accessible, at least in any official kind of a way. And also through to San Lazaro or Lazaro, that I know that on the low stress walk and bike map, there is shown a connection to that. I think Mark asked a question about on email through to one of the streets in there. If that were connected through, then that would it would improve connectivity for this site, and also it would make it more viable, the other amenities like the restaurant, more viable, because it would then be accessible for the residents of San Lazaro. And I really appreciated staff's very insightful comments about trying to create a streetscape. I think that's super important. There isn't a streetscape here, but to the extent that you can try to create a streetscape, I think that that would be wonderful. And that thing that I suggested about aligning the buildings with the ditch and then having a parallel street, I think that that would contribute to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Right, George?
Yeah, I'll be brief. I think I generally agree with kind of all the planning board members. I think ML's comments resonated with me at the front end, which was similarly to a number of planning board members, certainly not opposed to a residential use here, but the idea of this being a human development in otherwise industrial office park area, I think the design needs to be heavily reworked. I'll leave it like that. Sometimes we look at these things and we start to think through sort of how what we've been presented could be repositioned so that it would work. In this case, I just don't think I think the developer really just needs to rethink it and come back with something significantly different. Thanks.
Thanks, George. And my comments are, I'm in alignment with pretty much everything. I appreciate ML's comments, which were reiterating and reinforcing staff's comments about creating a cohesive neighborhood and human-centered design. And I actually think that when you get to the place where it's the right time to make another proposal, that maybe the way to think about that is, instead of using all that surface space for parking, is to build a parking garage back in the corner so that you have all this other space for green space and for housing. And then you actually can build a neighborhood center, a design that creates a sense of a tiny little neighborhood. But I think that you're so wedded to the parking because you are in this weird location that you basically created what looks like an office park, looks like a car park that has some buildings in it. And there are ways to get around that. But again, I think you might want to wait for a little while until there's a better sense of what else is happening on the hilltop. Okay, with that, we will wrap this one up. Let's plan for a 12-minute break. So we'll come back here at 8:10. And we will go through our 2 matters items, and one of which will take about an hour. All right, we'll see you back at 10 minutes after. All right, if you're in the sound of, within the sound of my voice, please come back. Excellent. All right, we're now moving to matters. Our first matter is a progress update on the implementation of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan zoning recommendations. Kathleen is going to be the staff person presenting to us tonight. We've set aside 20 minutes for staff presentation, and we thought it would make sense for her to be able to go through the whole thing before we ask questions. And then, of course, she'll stay on and we can bombard her with all the questions that we have. Brad or Charles, did you want to frame this out at all, or should we just get started?
Just get started. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, Kathleen,
Thanks.
please go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen, and it seems to work better if I share first and then project. So we'll try that. Okay, you seen presentation?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let me move some things around. Okay. Well, great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Good evening. My name is Kathleen King, and I'm a planner on the city's comprehensive planning team. So it's great to be back at Planning Board this evening with an update on a key implementation step of the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan. I think most of the board members were involved in the planning and/or adoption processes for the subcommunity plan that took place over the last few years. So I'm looking forward to working with you all on its implementation. So tonight we're going to be talking about zoning. I'm going to give a presentation first and go over some of the background and early process information that we've collected so far. Because I'm speaking to a couple of different topics, as Sarah mentioned, I'm going to ask that you hold your questions and we can spend some time following the presentation to go through those clarifying questions. And then I have some questions for you all focused on form-based code, and I look forward to getting your feedback. Okay, so we'll start with East Boulder and just give a reminder to folks about where this is. The East Boulder subcommunity is one of the city's 10 subcommunities, and it's generally located north of Arapahoe and east of Foothills Parkway. So it includes areas like Flatiron Business Park, the hospital, Valmont City Park, the site that you were just looking at. Today, the area is generally industrial and really office focused. The city went through a 3-year planning and engagement process to identify how the community would like to see East Boulder evolve over the next 15 to 20 years. And that resulted in the East Boulder Subcommunity Plan, which was adopted by the board and city council last year. During that process and captured in the plan, the community provided intentional direction for how they wanted certain neighborhoods to look and feel as they changed through redevelopment over time. So the plan uses a tool called place types that describe allowed and conditional ground floor uses. So this is the types of businesses or homes that we want to see along a street frontage. Allowed uses above ground floors, so whether upper stories should be residential or commercial or some combination of the two. Usable open space, describing expectations for the amount of outdoor space for social gathering or connection with nature. It also describes building character. So this imagines what buildings might look like and the kind of atmosphere they create. It includes guidance for street level activation, describing what kinds of design features might foster an appropriate exchange between building users and people on the street. Also includes streetscape character direction, which speaks to the kinds of landscaping, lighting, and even street furniture that might be appropriate. It also talks about access and mobility, considering how people and goods will move through these working and industrial neighborhoods. And then finally, expectations around parking, where it should be located and how it should follow the city's SUMP principles. So the plan is pretty specific in its direction, but I think as maybe Laura pointed out earlier, we don't yet have the regulatory tools in place to ensure that redevelopment will deliver these types of neighborhoods. So one of the key recommendations included in the plan
and identified as a priority for the first phase of implementation is this East Boulder zoning and form-based code study. So this is what our team's currently working on with support from a consultant team that includes code specialists. We've been working with the Codemetrics team over the past few years as part of the city's Design Excellence Initiative to improve the public realm and lead to design of better buildings in the community. So folks from Codemetrics developed the city's pilot form-based code, and that was recently updated to include some guidance for the Alpine Balsam site. So this project that I'm going to talk a little bit through includes two major components. So first, the zoning and a strategy to help property owners who are interested in rezoning their properties work with the city to update their zoning district. And then secondly, form-based code. We're considering whether form-based code is an appropriate tool for East Boulder neighborhoods and how it should be updated to implement the East Boulder subcommunity plan. So for the zoning element, we have generally 4 areas or neighborhoods in East Boulder, which the subcommunity plan calls areas of change. And these neighborhoods are where we're looking to go from these industrial focused districts to more walkable mixed use neighborhoods. So for the zoning, our options are to either use one or more of the city's existing zone districts and modify that district to match what's called for in the subcommunity plan, or we may consider creating new zones that would align with the guidance of the subcommunity plan. So this is something we're studying right now, and I'll be coming back to planning board in a few months with our initial recommendations on this piece. And then secondly, we're considering which, if any of these areas might be appropriate for form-based code. So in general, form-based code establishes building form and design standards, and then focuses on connection between building and public spaces like streets and plazas. And it provides a high level of predictability in the review process. So in Boulder, areas that are regulated by a form-based code are identified on the form-based code areas map in Appendix L of the code. The code describes that these areas should have plans associated, which East Boulder now does. And then the underlying zoning regulates the allowed uses in the area. So whether we choose to pursue form-based code or not, either way, we have to update the underlying zoning. The current zoning that's there doesn't allow for the sort of mix of uses that were imagined in the plan. And then the form-based code then actually acts as an overlay, providing specific guidance for things like building mass and scale, materials that can be used on facades, outdoor space types, and design for streetscapes. So this is all put together in what's called a regulating plan. So on the screen, these are the regulating plans that are currently in the code, and they cover those 2 areas identified on the map. So Boulder Junction and Alpine Balsam. For East Boulder, we would use some of the planned tools in the subcommunity plan, like the place type map, place type performance standards, and our mobility plan to develop regulating plans for East Boulder neighborhoods. So why are we considering extending form-based code to East Boulder? Form-based code in its purpose is really intended to create those walkable, human-scaled neighborhoods that are described in the subcommunity plan. And as a tool, it can help provide direct regulation around the outcomes that we've committed to in that plan. So we do think it's a good match. But before we commit, we wanted to take a look back at how form-based code has delivered on both local architecture and the public realm in places where it's been used so far. So in the city, there's actually only 3 projects that have gone through form-based code review process. Just in initial conversations with some community members, I think there's a misconception that all of the recent development in Boulder Junction was completed under form-based code, but it's actually only these 3 sites. So the first 2 are projects on the southeast corner of Bluff Street and Junction Place. And then the third larger project is the 30 Pearl project. Some of the buildings and spaces are totally completed and others are still under construction, but we can take a look at the character and quality of these places as they are today. And ask the question, is it working? So I've collected images from some of the sites, and I ask that as you consider this question, you're not necessarily critiquing the architect's choices, but instead consider whether the specific and measurable components of the code have improved the quality and character of the neighborhood as a place. So I've pulled just a couple of elements of building design that are regulated: massing and proportion, minimum heights and requirements for transparency on the ground floors, things related to setbacks, driveway access locations, facade materials, and recessed windows. So here's some images of how those are playing out in the built projects. And then in the public realm, looking at the pedestrian first dimensions for streets and paseos, how compatible the streetscape is with adjacent buildings. The form-based code provides really specific material guidance for those paseos throughout the area, and then expectations for outdoor lighting. These are just some of the design elements that are regulated by form-based code. And the specific requirements for all of these elements are identified through that regulating plan, which again assigns building types, street types, and outdoor space types in the neighborhood. So if we do pursue this for East Boulder neighborhoods, there's a point in the future where we'll ask you to really get into the kind of nitty-gritty of these details. But for now, I'm just giving a general overview and asking for initial and more general feedback. So as part of this process, we've been working with the community through a couple of different engagement venues to collect their feedback on both the code itself and the form-based code review process. We've assembled a technical advisory committee of members of the local design community who work in Boulder as well as other places and have experience with designing for development. And then we've also engaged a series of focus groups. So these include area property owners and developers, area business owners, mobility service providers, and mobility advocates, and then also a group of local planning and housing advocates. We're also holding kind of one-on-one interviews with groups like Boulder Housing Partners and those interested in redevelopment in the area. In general, community members have identified some challenges with code and process, some benefits to the form-based code, and opportunities for improvement. So starting with the challenges, we've heard from folks on that technical advisory committee that they're worried that the specificity of regulation in form-based code can limit creativity. From the business owners and business community, there's definitely a concern about affordability of commercial spaces and just East Boulder's ability to support small business as the area redevelops. And then from folks that have gone through this process already, they've described that the projects, despite going through the form-based code review, are still getting called up, which adds to their overall project cost. And then for benefits, in general, folks really appreciate the predictability of the form-based code review process. We've heard from designers that it really supports their work with clients and trying to convince clients to either kind of do the right thing from a design perspective or choose higher quality materials. And in general, the community that we've engaged with and talked to do believe that the form-based code works as a way to prevent bad architecture and some of the poor building design that we were seeing, which kind of kicked off that design excellence initiative. Community members also identified some opportunities for improvement. So things like updating the material palette for East Boulder so that it better matches the industrial aesthetic in the area and also considers how the quality and cost of material will impact unit costs kind of down the line. They've also asked us to consider design features over 55 feet that could support more variability in roof styles. And also, they're actually looking for more information and more direction on design of public realm and things like plazas and streetscapes. So we also, as part of the process, had a staff workshop with folks from our development review team, as well as the city attorney's office, to understand their perspective on how well the form-based code and that associated review process are working. So some of the challenges that they've identified are that the projects so far have not delivered outdoor spaces that feel welcoming to children or families. And, you know, my team also worked on the update to Boulder Junction Phase 2, and that's something we heard through that process as well. So that's echoed in a couple of different projects now. There's some feedback that the Bluff Street buildings don't have a lot of variability in color or window patterning. And, you know, those projects were designed by the same architect. So just, you know, thinking through how we can put in guidance so that adjacent buildings maybe don't mirror each other is something we're thinking about. We've heard from builders that the maximum building length limitations drive up costs and ultimately unit prices. And then, as you may know, the Alpine Balsam site is going through a form-based code review right now. And we're learning that the form-based code and the review process work really well for total redevelopment, but it's been more challenging for adaptive reuse. Some of the benefits that we've heard from staff, those specific and measurable regulations that are included in the code make negotiation with the development teams and their architecture teams much easier. Folks feel that the view corridors have really resulted in those preserved vistas in the Boulder Junction neighborhood in particular. We've heard that the paseos are really well used and liked by residents, so the kind of design requirements for those seems to be successful. And then also that high quality materials have elevated the aesthetic quality of that neighborhood. Some of the opportunities that staff identified, looking for ways to get more variability in roof styles. We've heard not only from staff, but from community members that the flat roofs throughout that project are not desirable. Also the idea of allowing for longer buildings if they can be broken up by courtyards or articulation of roof form. And then there's also an idea about developing a menu of options for ground level activation requirements. So, you know, I think for the couple of Boulder Junction buildings, there was a pretty heavy requirement for ground floor retail, and they're having a hard time filling those spaces and activating those spaces. And so thinking about other active ground floor uses that we could allow for as we update the code. So we're going to take all of this feedback along with your input tonight to complete the first phase of our project. And that is an inventory and analysis that looks at form-based code in particular, and then its applicability to East Boulder. So in the next month, we'll move into rezoning recommendations, and we'll work on how we may incorporate community benefits identified in the sub-community plan into future rezoning strategies. And once we have solid recommendations about those two pieces, I'm going to bring that back to planning board either end of this year or probably early next year with some draft recommendations for how we might move forward on this implementation effort. We'll take board and council feedback at that point and create some draft zoning and potentially draft form-based code updates and regulating plans that we'll put out for a citywide public review. And then we hope to complete the effort and go for adoption next spring. So we can see some of that plan come to fruition in the next couple of years. That's about it. Since the sub-community plan really sets the vision for the area, this work is pretty technical and detailed. So I hope I've given you a general overview of what we'll be working on, but I imagine you do have questions. So I'm happy to take questions now, and then we could go into board discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So for folks who have questions, please raise your electronic hand and I will call on people. All right, Laura has raised her hand.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Kathleen, for that presentation. It's really nice to see you. Thank you
Nice to
for all
see
your
you.
hard work, both on the sub-community plan and now the implementation phase. It's so exciting that that's where we're at. Yes, I'm very excited about it. I do have a few questions. You mentioned that all 3 of the projects that were completed in Boulder Junction under form-based code got called up by planning board, and that was before my time on planning board, so that means about half of us weren't here. Can you help us understand why those projects were called up and if changes were made as a result of those call-ups? I also imagine that planning board was curious to, get more detail about those projects since they were the first ones out the gate. So can you just help me understand what happened with those call-ups?
Yes, and I might ask Charles to weigh in too, because I'm sure he knows more about those than I do. But my understanding is projects do get called up if there are exceptions being asked for. So a couple of the project had exceptions. I believe that there were no changes made as a result of the call up.
Okay, so it wasn't like a voluntary call up that we called it up because we were concerned about something, but it was like a mandatory call up because there was something that was requested that was an exception.
I'm gonna ask Charles.
No, I actually think that they were called up, and I think since they were the initial form-based code related projects, I think there was a lot of curiosity initially. There are also very big projects that were kind of transformative at the time. I don't recall any changes that resulted from the call-up conversations, but actually, now that I think about it, I think there may have been some material changes that were discussed on 30th and Pearl. But my recollection is really that they were called up, I think, out of curiosity to have the opportunity to perform a more surgical review of what was being proposed based on the size of the project.
Thank you. I do have a few more questions, but I don't know, Sarah, if it is appropriate to ask you and George and Lisa if you wanted to throw in on why those projects were called up or what the results were from your perspective on planning board at the time.
I think I may have been the only one who was on planning board at the, and that was at the tail end. So George, I know George wasn't. Then Lisa's talking to her babysitter, so maybe we'll come back to her. Lisa, were you on planning board when All right, we'll come back.
I just have a quick, were they called up by planning board only or by council and planning board or some combination?
Planning board only.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I think I called one up. I called up the air gas building because it was 150 feet long. That's my recollection. I could be wrong about that, but that's my recollection. And I don't know what the other 2 that were called up.
Okay, thank you. I have a question about, you talk about potential for unoccupied roof volume and other architectural design features above 55 feet. Can you say more about what might be considered there? I know that, there was very specific ballot language that was approved and put into the charter around what kinds of things can be over 55 feet. Is it within that, or is it something different being considered? Would it require going back out for public vote to change that?
I'm not sure. Is this recent ballot language that you're referring to?
Oh, no, I'm talking about like in the 70s. I think it was
Okay,
1974
in the city
when
charter,
the height
sure.
limitation in the city charter. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong words. It's late.
Yeah. So the things that some of the folks on the technical advisory committee have talked about are like parapets, different types of screening for HVAC than what's currently allowed. Definitely there's an interest in rooftop access and having taller railings on roofs. So those were some of the things I remember from that meeting.
And maybe you haven't done the analysis on this yet, but are you thinking that these are things that would be sort of staff interpretation and would fall under the existing charter language, or is the city considering asking the public to vote on this again for something that's different than what's in the charter around the height limitation?
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look at the charter and see what the specifics are of what is and is not allowed up to that 55 foot. But anything that we're discussing would be described really specifically and have specific measurements and materials, and all of that would be laid out in the form-based code.
Okay.
So there wouldn't be a lot of room for interpretation, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Gotcha. No, my question around interpretation was, is this more about how staff interpret the existing charter language around the height limitation versus would we need to ask the public for permission to modify that charter provision on height?
Yeah, I'll have to look into it more. I don't have a good answer.
Okay, thank you.
Laura?
One other question and then maybe pass around. It said on page 59, staff have been challenged by developers on incorporating family and children-oriented spaces, and developers are describing that these spaces don't meet the market. Can you say more about that? Like, what are they saying about it doesn't meet the market?
Yeah, so it came up a little bit, I guess, and it's a little of a chicken and an egg situation is my interpretation. If you build it, they'll come, but right now, the types of products that are getting built in that area and what their market testing is showing is that a lot of the unit types and spaces in the Boulder Junction area in particular are not family driven. They really are for more single folks or kind of younger workforce or couples without children. And, that's what they are finding that they can rent their units to and what the units are marketed for. And so they're describing, we really need to provide places that are active for that kind of demographic. And so putting a playground is not a usable space for that demographic, perhaps, but I think there is an argument to be made that if you create the place for families, it could draw families.
Okay, thank you. I might have some more questions, but I will pass for now.
Thanks. I'm going to try to go around the horn. ML and then Kurt.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kathleen, for this update. You guys have been busy getting all the input to get us to this point here. So I'm understanding that the first question we're looking at here is, has the form-based code delivered the desired outcomes of previously adopted plans? We're talking about the 3 sites at TVAC, really? Is that because Balsam? Yeah.
ML,
So,
ML, I'm sorry. You can certainly answer the first question, but we were actually just, if you had clarifying questions for Kathleen, now would also be time to ask those questions.
I missed that. I missed that. Clarifying, yeah, actually, I do have a question. I'm looking at my notes here. Sorry, I apologize. So in answer to this question number 1, I saw the analysis of the input that you've gotten and where the staff is at. Did staff have a general response to, is this successful? Is this something we want to, what is staff's opinion on implementing this in further into East Boulder Sub-Community Plan? I don't think that I saw kind of that conclusion from staff.
Yeah, I think what we heard in the staff workshop is, in general, the form-based code is working. The buildings that have come out of a form-based code review and the process to deliver that review has worked really well. And I think that the staff pointed out a number of components like the quality materials, the view corridors, things like that, that they felt like were really delivered on, that were identified in that Transit Village Area Plan as being really important and key to the future success. So yeah, I think what I heard in that staff workshop is, in general, they think it's working, but there's certainly improvements to be made in both the regulations and the review process.
And you made a comment, or maybe it was written on one of the slides under staff feedback benefits, specific and measurable regulations make negotiation with development teams easier. So is the review process in fact a negotiation between staff and developers? Or what does that refer to?
Yeah, I think in site review, you know, the some of the criteria is left to interpretation by staff, and the development team and staff and the community and planning board can all have different understanding of how that should be interpreted. And so there is a real negotiation process that goes on between staff and development teams to get to an outcome that everyone agrees is appropriate and workable. In form-based code, because the requirements are really clear and measurable, and the applicant has to demonstrate specifically how they've met each of those requirements, there's not as much need for that negotiation.
I see. So thus it's a benefit in that regard.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we've heard that from both staff and folks who've gone through the form-based code review process so far.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you so much.
Kurt and then Mark. And if after Mark, if no one has questions, then we'll try to answer Kathleen's questions for her.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Kathleen. My first question regards the ownership of the 3 properties that you identified that have gone through the form-based code. I know that 30 Pearl is a BHP project. Are the other 2 non-BHP? I'm just wondering, I know that BHP has different, you know, needs and requirements and drivers than like a completely private owner. So I'm just wondering if it works for other people.
Are the 2 other project non-BHP owned? Yes, I think the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And then you said that one of the identified challenges, I guess, was that form-based code doesn't work so well for adaptive reuse, is what you were finding with Alpine Balsam. Is that, are you talking about that specifically with regards to the pavilion building, or what? Can you give a little more detail on what you mean by that? Because I'm hoping that there will be a lot of adaptive reuse in East Boulder subcommunity.
Yeah, I think it's one of the topics that we have to dig into more, but what I understand is the Alpine Balsam site, a portion of the site is in an existing PUD. So there's these like overlapping layers of regulation and trying to decide which one comes out on top and how to make them both work together. So I think that's a component of it. But then for the existing building, you know, whether it's material or recessed windows, or, you know, what are the components that the existing building is not meeting in the form-based code? I'm not sure, but we'll look into that more as we think about how to update the code so that we can use form-based code for adaptive reuse.
Okay, and getting into that a little more specifically,
Mhm.
so as it currently applies at Alpine Balsam, in order to approve whatever's happening with the pavilion building, would it have to meet all the requirements of the form-based code?
Yeah, it's pursuing a form-based code review, so it would have to meet it. It's in a form-based code review area, so it has to meet it. I don't know where they're at in the process and whether they'll be asking for exceptions, but that might be an outcome.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's all.
Thanks, Kurt. Mark?
One of the comments I heard from one of the developers of the building that is noted in number 1 and 2 on your diagram there, was that form-based code requires a design of a 4-sided building, and that can be at times very expensive, in the sense of, I don't have a back alley, or I'm designing the alley side with the same criteria as the front side, as the street side, and that it's expensive in terms of mechanical screening and trash removal and all those kind of things that generally are kind of around the back of the building, and many times not much money is spent on them. So my question is are revisions to the form-based code requirement for East Boulder being considered to lighten that burden, so that we don't create the same kind of expensive spaces that a true 4-sided design requires? Is that part of the East Boulder plan to make it so it's not quite so expensive if you have an alley or a backside of the building that isn't really facing anything?
I think there are a number of components of the form-based code that we'll be looking at specifically for cost implications, because we've heard that feedback as well as some of the other requirements that these development teams are describing as really driving up ultimately the unit cost. So I think it's a yes and answer. And, you know, the building types and the street types that were created for Boulder Junction are probably not all suitable, and we can't just take those and apply them to East Boulder. We'll have to create new ones, particularly because East Boulder is an industrial area. We know we're going to have trucks coming through there. We know we need loading and unloading zones. All of those kind of things we'll take into consideration.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wait, Laura, before I call on you, Lisa or George, do you have questions? Clarifying questions? No. Okay, Laura.
Or you, Sarah, do you? Oh, okay. I have just one more, and that is, Kathleen, were you listening to the project that we just talked about for concept review?
Yes.
Okay. I am curious to get your thought. I did mention at the outset that what is being considered for that site is not consistent with what was envisioned in the East Boulder sub-community plan. And you mentioned at the outset of this session that, the tools aren't really in place yet for how to implement the East Boulder sub-community plan, including the zoning and this form-based code. And so my question to you is, once those tools are in place, the zoning and the form-based code, would that have in any way directed or guided or changed what is possible on the project that we just looked at, to make it more compliant with the East Boulder sub-community plan?
I don't think that this project will impact that site. We're really focused on zoning and rezoning the areas of change and updating and potentially applying form-based code to those areas of change. Once all of that is in place, there may be a future step where we relook at that residential and industrial again, because it was updated in response to the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan in part to serve this sort of interim period. So, you know, we may reconsider that in the future, but that's definitely further down the line.
Okay, thank you. And just one really quick follow-up. I think I heard you say that the form-based code that is being considered would be specific to the areas of change in the East Boulder Sub-Community Plan, not necessarily for the whole East Boulder area. Is that right?
Just those areas of change. So just where we have direction from that place types map and the place type performance standards.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Okay, so Kathleen, shall we move on to the 2 key issues?
Yep, that would be great.
Okay, so key issue number 1 was, has the form-based code delivered the desired outcomes of previously adopted plans? And I guess maybe, Kathleen, do you want me just to go around the horn and see what everybody has to say? Does that work for you?
Yeah, I think that would be great. And maybe similar to some of the questions that came up, if there are concerns or issues that you've identified in some of that built work that you'd like us to study or address in code updates, I'd love to note that as well, because the next time we come back for this project, we'll have some draft recommendations for you to react to.
Okay. Would anyone mind if I started? I think in general, in the right amount, in the right places, form-based code is a positive thing. I will say that as I've seen 30 Pearl go up, I'm not finding the sort of facade, which is, I think, intended to create a fake delineate, to make these big buildings look like they're slightly smaller. I don't think that's worked. And I think, in fact, it's quite unattractive. So I think that's a part of that's a component of that particular form-based code that I would try very hard to not emulate anywhere else. And I am a little concerned knowing what we approved, knowing the basic design elements that we approved for the hospital site. I'm a little concerned that that's going to look the same way, because although some of us were pushing for actual townhomes, what we got was facades that would look like townhomes. And I'm really worried that we're going to get that same sort of unattractive, really faux looking facade there. And I think it'd be very inappropriate for the neighborhood that it's abutting. I think that the smaller roadways in the TVAP one work very, very well. Unfortunately, there's not enough green space to make it a fully enjoyable experience. It's just nice that there's less traffic in that area. And then in terms of the lack of good outdoor space, that is absolutely my take on both TVAP. And although I don't think 30 Pearl is done, I know that there were critiques by the then planning board of the way the public space, the shared public space, was sort of internal to the buildings and also where the parking garage entrance was. So I don't know exactly what's happened with that ultimately in terms of what the final design was, but I do think you really want to make sure with form-based code, whatever elements are included, that there be a lot of open space, a lot of freestanding trees, and that you really do create. Maybe you don't have space for playground, although I think your point, which is if you don't build playgrounds, you're never going to get families to move in there, into those highly dense areas. You want to have a lot of open space that are where people can hang out and congregate, because they're not going to necessarily walk all the way up to Central Park or Chautauqua or North Boulder Park to do that, or even east. So those are my comments, and I appreciate my colleagues letting me go first. Kurt, why don't you go next?
Thanks. Yeah, my feeling about the form-based code is it produces solid sort of B or maybe B- buildings. And it prevents bad architecture, but it also prevents really good architecture. And so you end up, as we're seeing, we end up with a lot of pretty darn similar looking stuff. I mean, there's superficial variation, but the basic concepts are all the same. And I worry about having too much of that proliferating throughout these relatively large areas of East Boulder. So that's my primary concern. I'm also concerned because I believe that Coburn is the only developer that has done any of the form-based code stuff, right? And
That's
so can anybody else?
Wasn't TVAP wasn't Coburn. TVAP was what's his
There
name?
was Coburn and KTGY.
It's Scott, whatever his name is, who now doesn't live in the city anymore. Scott, help me here, Charles. Scott.
I can't remember his name, but the big building with
Holton.
that was that?
Yeah, Scott, yeah.
Yeah, anyway, that building is not a Coburn building, the one noted on your map as 1 and 2. I believe that's not a Coburn building, I don't think.
Yes, I don't think it was
So
only
I think the point is I was wrong, and
No,
more
but you were
than
just
one
like-
developer. That's good. I'm glad to know that I was wrong, and more than one developer can do this. And so that's less of a concern. I am though concerned about not just there's the aesthetic outcome, which is super important, but then there's also about whether the form-based code makes things impractical to develop, right? And I think that is maybe still a little bit TBD, because TVAP, is an area where the values are pretty high, and we've been able to get some new projects through the form-based code. But I wonder what would not happen if what projects would not be able to happen if we applied the form-based code. So those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you. George, do you have anything?
I think my comments are generally consistent with yours, Sarah. I don't have much more to add.
Okay, thank you. Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at. I'm taking kind of in both directions. There's the things that form-based code did deliver here. I like the Paseos. I agree, that in some ways the variation of the fronts wasn't quite as much as it could have been, but I like that they were more weighty and often expensive materials that went in. The lack of amenities for families is really disappointing. They were promised a pocket park with a little playground there. And as somebody with a young child, I'll say that when there's a playground, you use it even if you don't live in that neighborhood, because you're trying to wear your kid out before you go into the house. You're trying to, get some more energy out before nap, or, you use playgrounds when they're available. And I now constantly notice which spaces do or don't have playgrounds. And I will choose where I go in the city based on whether or not that amenity is available to me, and so I appreciate that description of it kind of as a chicken and an egg problem. I didn't take as deep of a dive as I wish I had into kind of how we ended up designing and defining form-based code in this context. I have a vague memory that could be true, could be false, that it wasn't quite full true form-based code, that we sort of watered it down a little bit. And so whenever that happens, and then we say, oh, but we didn't get the results we really wanted, I'm like, well, yeah, because you didn't do the thing, you know? So I'm still a fan of form-based code, done fully, done properly. Sounds like staff is, you know, kind of trying to taking into consideration, being really thoughtful about what it's delivering, what it's not. And I see, you know, I take the point that they were all called up by planning board. This was a really important developable area. I don't think that really has that much necessarily to do with form-based code versus anything else. We were always going to call those up. It's a big deal. I also expect us to call up a lot of alpine balsam, and I don't think it's because or not because of form-based code. We're going to call it up. We want to talk about it. Anyway, I don't know if that's useful for staff, but those are some of my thoughts on this one.
Thank you, Lisa. Mark? Did I already call on you, Mark?
No.
Okay.
So I am generally in favor of the application of form-based code in designated areas, and I concur with Kurt and Sarah in that sometimes bad stuff happens under either system, under just a code and site review, and then sometimes under form-based code, you can have some bad things happen. But one of the things that under both systems that I am distressed by, and Sarah touched on it, is the kind of variation for the sake of variation, whether you're trying to falsify a big facade and make it look like townhouses and it's really not, or you go from brick to metal to wood and then back to brick to metal to wood, and you get this patchworky variation that says, oh, isn't this interesting design? We don't have this single big material, but you know, there's nothing wrong with a big building, and big buildings can be beautiful and interesting, and big buildings don't always have to incorporate many different materials and stuff. They can be beautifully designed from one material or two or whatever. But and I look at, you know, you look at the University of Colorado, you look at Edinburgh, Scotland, you look at, you know, many big buildings in Manhattan. It's like, oh, some are really beautiful, and they're not beautiful just because they have a bunch of variation. So, and the final thing I'll say is that whether it's in our code or just applied in form-based code, I do fully support the idea of different types of roof lines, different types of roof structures. Currently, we have a 55-foot maximum height limit, but screening and HVAC and all that stuff is all, oh, you can put as much ugly corrugated sheet metal up on a roof that's seen by tens of thousands of people a day driving by on Foothills Parkway, but you want to put a sloped roof on, well, that's a no-no. So if I would love to see in form-based code, especially in these industrial buildings, in areas of change in East Boulder, that we have design that is more creative, more pleasing, and part of that would be to not have near so many. We're never going to get rid of flat roofs, but not have near so many flat roof forms. That's my comment.
ML and then Laura.
Oh gosh, there is it's such a big subject. I'm gonna narrow it down to a couple of things. One is, I think in one of the benefits or one of the to-dos or somewhere, you mentioned develop a menu of options for ground level activation requirements. I think that is a fundamental key to a lot of the things that people are having concerns with. Like, what is the experience of the people who work there, live there, visit there? And how does that experience unfold? And you can't just say, well, here's a building and there's the setback and there's a sidewalk and throw some green in. I think what makes a vibrant space hasn't been articulated nearly enough if you walk through some of the existing sites out there at the TBAP sites. And I don't know if it's form-based code's job, although it sounds like it might be, just given that that was one of the comments you guys made. But I think that that's an important component. And furthermore, in relation to, I'm going to kind of segue into the buildings themselves. One of the comments was that busy buildings result from the specification of materials and so many materials and how they transition and yada yada. I absolutely agree with Mark that I think requiring material palette just for the sake of requiring material palette is the wrong way to get a good building. I would suggest that if we take the first floor and look at awnings and overhangs, and buildings can shape themselves. There can be overhung spaces. There can be angled floors. There can be amazingly wonderful things happen in that first, second floor that aren't about making a wavy gravy roof or doing something that the pedestrian is not going to really experience, but to articulate and to carve space and to think about that experience at the ground level as being three-dimensional. I think you're going to start addressing some of the concerns about boxy buildings, long facades, too many materials, inactivated, underused spaces. And that, I think, opens up a conversation for the designers to begin thinking outside of the box, right? I'm going to make the best building I can because I'm now going to be prompted by the form-based code. I'm going to be prompted to consider the base as having some articulation other than just in the line. Is it a long wall? Should I recess it? Well, how about if you overhang it? How about if you give it a form? How about if you bring in these other means to define edges and to define space? So I would suggest looking at massing factors, and especially on the first and second floors, that I think will help solve a lot of the problems that form-based code seems to bring up in the experience and in the final unfolding of what the building is. And I would absolutely agree with the idea that if we want families to move into this area, don't back down, because if developers say, hey, the park isn't matching we're going to keep getting high-end housing for single people. If we want communities that have a diverse population, we have to start creating opportunities for these people to show up. And if there's, if you can't find yourself, in the, well, where am I going to hang out? Where am I going to do my stuff? Well, then you're not going to go there. So I think that staff needs to be very clear on the kind of community that will result. And, if it's not going to be the highest profit margin for somebody, well, that's okay. That's why that's why you guys are planners. the outcome is about what we want in our city. So I'll stop with that. But thank you, Kathleen. This is a very vibrant project, and I like that it is trying to self-inform for the next steps.
Thanks, ML. And Laura, you get to give us the last word on this question.
Oh gosh, too much responsibility, Sarah.
Sorry.
It's okay. That's okay. I'll do my best. I want to really agree with a lot of the comments that I have heard. I don't think I heard anything that I disagreed with, although I'm not entirely sure I understood. I don't think my architecture knowledge is sophisticated enough to have followed everything that ML just said, but I think I agreed with just about everything that I heard. I want to second Sarah's comments about open space, gathering places and trees. I want to second Kurt's comment about let's really make sure, if we can, that form-based code has opportunities for creativity and for things to look a little bit different. I don't know how you do that. I think that's a huge challenge, but that we don't want form-based code to be limiting excellent architecture if we can avoid it. I want to second Mark's comments on variation for the sake of variation. I don't think we want to promote that. And what he mentioned earlier about four-sided architecture, I've heard those comments as well, of needing to have spaces for trash and electrical boxes that make sense. I will add one thing. This might be too fine-grained of a detail, but as far as materials go, in visiting the Boulder Junction area, and I'm not sure if it was these specific projects, but the use of rusty metal as a design choice, I feel like is not going to be timeless. It's not going to be something that ages well. I think just like shabby chic farmhouse kind of stuff, I think that having materials that look like they're decaying is not going to be something that plays well over time. So the rusty metals for me really strike a sour note. And I think that's what I want to say about question 1. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Kathleen, before we go on to the last question, do you feel like you got adequate feedback?
I think rusty metal is core 10. Yeah, okay. Emma's giving me a thumbs up. Yes, all of that is super helpful, and I think provides some good direction for other elements that we're going to analyze moving forward. So yeah, go ahead and move on to process.
Right. The very last question is, how well is the form-based code review process working? I will answer first. I have no idea because I'm not trying to implement it. So I will pass it along to George. Your thoughts?
Similar. I feel the same way.
Kurt?
Well, I think it was completely appropriate that the planning board called up these first 3 projects because, we didn't know whether this whole new system was going to work and what the outcomes were going to be and that sort of thing. So I feel like that was very informative and a wise decision. But I think going forward, as we gain more confidence in the outcomes and we know what we're going to be getting, I think we could definitely limit that. I don't know exactly what mechanism to use to do that, but I think it would be appropriate to make that a much more limited power.
Laura?
I'll say I agree that I don't really have any particular insight into how well the process is working. And I think it's great, Kathleen, the amount of stakeholder outreach that you have done to talk to the people, both on the staff side and on the applicant side, of how this is going. So I would defer to that. I just want to put in a plug that I do think that the goal of form-based code, of making the process faster and more predictable, if you're seeing that is working, I think that is laudable, and we should keep going in that direction. I'm all for it. And I agree with Kurt that it was appropriate for planning board to be calling up these first out the gate kind of projects. And hopefully we will see less need for that going forward, so that some of these projects can actually realize the benefits of having a more predictable process with less intervention that's more discretionary.
All right, Lisa, I'll just respond to that briefly, Laura, which is at least when I was previously on planning board, they were called up in part because they actually were not just abiding by form-based code. They were actually asking for for variances. So I'll just to be clear, ML, Lisa, then Mark.
Thank you, Sarah. So I do have a comment based on Kathleen, you're helping me understand that it is a negotiation. And so I would think that the form-based code review process works well when the applicant sees that their context, and this is speaking to form-based code in existing context, working with existing buildings and in a context that isn't a blank piece of dirt. And to that end, I would say that the industrial aesthetic in material form and in sort of space development should be on the table. I think a developer needs to be able to see themselves in the opportunities and in the options, and especially if we're going to apply it to even TVAP 2, which has a lot of existing fabric as well, to have the review process as a negotiation have enough responsibility, show enough responsibility to an existing fabric so that it can in fact be a negotiation rather than just okay, this isn't working and let's figure out how to make it work. That there are things on the table that can become a starting point. That would be the only. I love that it is a negotiation. It's kind of interesting that's how it goes, but I think that place at the table for the various contexts would be a great addition to that process.
Yeah, ML, Lisa, and then Mark.
Yeah, so it's without getting into the nitty-gritty more than I've been able to, it's hard for me to know how well it's working. I don't know, you tell me. But I will say that, based on what we heard from staff, I think the fact that PUD is in place really made things a lot more complicated. So that's one of the things that I think would be interesting for future sites or other places where we're applying form-based code is to look at mechanisms, if they're available, to ease other restrictions so that you don't have these conflicting structures that are both sort of trying to manage some of the same things, and you have to somehow accommodate both. The idea ideally with form-based code, I think, would be to simplify the process for planners and also for developers when they're scoping projects, let alone developing them and going through the review process. So I don't know exactly how well it's working, but I think the extent to which we're kind of following an old thing and trying to do a new thing at the same time is probably making things unnecessarily bureaucratic and confusing and possibly producing some strange outcomes.
Thanks, Lisa. And Mark, you get the last word.
Well, I'm still confused by the question, even though I'm going last. I guess, Kathleen, are you asking how well is the form-based code review process working, meaning our review of projects that have been built by form-based code? Or are you asking that form-based code is undergoing a review and consequently, how well is that process of reviewing the form-based code going?
No,
I
appreciate your confusion. I'm sorry, that's not clear. No, I mean the form-based code review as a process in comparison to, say, site review, not the review of the process of this particular effort.
Well, having never reviewed a form-based code project, then I guess just fine. But I will say that that as more projects are built under form-based code, certainly it will be a challenge. I'll just accept responsibility and say it'll be a challenge for me to say, well, this was done under form-based code, and by golly, I'm just going to trust the system and let it go, and all my thoughts and feelings and opinions and stuff. You know, so it will be a challenge to release that after concept reviews, site reviews. You know, you go through years of this stuff, and you think that you have something to offer, and that you know, you've read the BVCP, and so it'll be challenging, I think, for us. I know it will be for me to how much we trust the system to put forth projects that we say, yep, looks good. See you later.
Okay, Kathleen, any last words? Sorry, Mark, I know I said yours were the last words, but let's just see if Kathleen has anything else she wants to say.
I don't. I have some, just because it's fun, I have some images in response to the idea of form-based code limiting creativity that the consultant shared with me. And it didn't necessarily come up in the clarifying questions, but I just want to show them because they're fun.
Sure.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen really quick.
I don't know, Kathleen, this is planning board. I don't know if we allow fun.
I know, but just for a little fun before I leave. So Leslie from Codametrics sent me these images of different buildings from around the world that she said, you know, they don't meet all of the details of Boulder's form-based code, but in general, these buildings meet the principles of form-based code. And so I just thought I'd share this for a little inspiration, and because they're a little wackier.
The building on the one on the far left of the three pictures,
Yeah,
that's in help me here, ML. That's
Barcelona.
the Gaudi building.
A Gaudi building, and I'm pretty sure that was built like 80 years ago before there was form-based code.
Sure, yes, but they the principles of design that are in form-based code are also in these buildings. So I thought that was kind of fun that she shared that. So I wanted to show you before I left.
Are you sharing these images with the developers?
Modern architecture is maybe.
What's that?
Maybe it's a sign of how bad some modern architecture is, or
well, I don't know
architecture.
About that. But Laura, your question, in the technical advisory committee, they asked that in the code, we actually provide more images for inspiration. So yeah, we'll collect more and put some in there.
Love to see it.
And those actually speak to some of the things I was talking about.
Right? Yeah, the with the ground floor.
The fact that you can have overhangs from the base, and the shape doesn't, so awesome. Thanks.
And I think it would be great to try to work backwards from some of those and say, if this is the outcome, the kinds of outcomes that we want, where do we start? You know, what is the form-based code that will allow these things? If our current code doesn't allow them, what's the kind of code that would allow them?
All right, Kathleen, thank you so much. We now go on to matters item number 2, or B, which is a review of the draft retreat agenda. We have 10 minutes set aside for that. I do not know if it's Brad or Mark and Kurt. I don't know who's exactly taken on this responsibility. But since Brad has appeared, I'm assuming it's Brad.
Well, I don't know that it is, but I'm happy to be part of it. I do plan to be part of the conversation. Certainly happy to defer to Charles or Mark and Kurt. I think while we kind of tee it up, I can say with confidence that we always appreciate the committee's input on this. Charles, did you want to lead into this, or you want me to lead in?
By all means, feel free.
Okay. Well, I can also say with confidence, at least from a staff perspective, we're really excited about the upcoming retreat. the group that has talked through it both with Mark and Kurt, and I hope they speak up, has been thoughtful about it. And then we had an internal discussion about it to polish it a bit more. So at that point, we were able to confirm to the availability of a facilitator. It is not the person that I don't know if this had gotten relayed to you yet or not. Mark and Kurt, this is obviously not the person that has worked with council in the past, but Samuel Wallace is from that same firm. The person whose name I'm forgetting that you recommended wasn't available that night.
Yeah,
So,
Heather Bergman, who I think is the principal at the firm, highly recommended her colleague Samuel.
so we're getting the next best thing, and a couple of us will be meeting with him tomorrow just to polish up the agenda. As you can see, the main focus is just some of the
we can't see
interaction.
anything, Brad.
What's that?
Oh, sorry, nothing. Sorry, my mistake.
I was just going to say, if you've got the agenda item in front of you, you know that the main subject matters are the interaction of the department and the board, the discussion about effective board meetings and discussions, a bit about criteria-based decision making, and then we want to give folks a chance to feel comfortable in front of the dais, since we'll be moving towards the in-person hybrid by early November. So just give that a little bit of a feel for things. We'll have the appropriate staff for that. I did want to introduce a thought to the group that had not come up yet, and that was the possibility of actually making the dinner time and introduction and gathering time a full hour instead of the half hour that is currently shown. Just given that we've all been away from each other for so long, and recognizing people might be traveling and settling in, plus the actual act of getting the food in one's mouth and all, seemed like we might want to be a little more generous with that amount of time and be able to do some, get to know you time informally and maybe formally. So wanted to put that out as a possibility.
Brad, are you proposing to move the entire agenda back so we would adjourn at 8:30?
Yeah, I think I am suggesting that.
As a member of the subcommittee, I'll say, well, we're going to see what Mr. Wallace is made of, because this is a big agenda, and we'll see how he does helping us get through this in a timely fashion. But I certainly concur with the 5 to 6 dinner hour. So that's my only input.
Does anyone have Kurt, do you want to add anything? Or does anyone have questions, comments?
I just wanted to make sure that everyone was going to be able to meet at 5. I think maybe we discussed this time frame, but I just wanted to verify, because obviously we ordinarily start at 6. So I don't want to infringe on people's day space.
Well, I don't have a problem with people meeting at 5, starting at 5. I will probably be late coming to the meeting. I have a big board meeting that day, which I will have just been wrapping up.
So that seems like extending it to an hour for dinner would help you, Sarah, so that you don't have to arrive late and grab food real fast.
Yeah, that would be fine. And if not, I'll show up when I show up. I promise I will be there. I just may not be there exactly at 5.
I'll say for myself, I'm fine to meet at 5 and end at 8:30 so that we can have that full hour for dinner. As a fellow facilitator, I'm sure that Samuel Wallace will do just fine with this agenda. Some things might get compressed and some things might expand, but I'm sure he'll roll with the changes. And I think this looks great. So kudos to the staff and subcommittee that helped to put this together. And I'm very excited about it. I have just one question, which is for the municipal building. I think in the past I've parked at the library. I probably will drive given the time of year and the time of night. Do you have a different parking recommendation other than the library?
That might be a Devin question.
Well, there's parking directly adjacent to the Penfield Tate building.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's just, if you were to keep going down from the library, keep going east from the library, there's parking that's literally almost right next to the front, to the side door.
Yeah. So
Oh,
it's on
okay.
the
I'll
west
look for
side
that.
of the building, yeah.
I'll look for that. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Charles.
I'll actually also be sending out a map a little bit later with that actual information of the parking and everything, so it's a lot easier for you.
Awesome, Devin. Thank you. I should have known you'd be on it.
Of course. No problem.
Can I just, one other thing, okay, I'm not very techie. And since we're doing this dry run of the technology and procedures, I'm just wondering if maybe a little more time for the dry run, a little less time for dinner might be helpful. Or maybe I know I will only be doing this for a few more months, and maybe I can come in for a separate dry run, but I might need some additional help than just a 30-minute.
Yeah, I think you'll find that probably the 30 minutes is fine, but we also would be happy to, meet with folks separately or, stay a little longer.
All right, anybody else have things they want to say? Comments? All right, well, thank you to Kurt and Mark for leading the charge on this. And are there any other matters, Brad or Charles? Devin?
Nothing from staff, no.
Okay, Laurel, anything from you? All right, anything from other staff, board members? All right, then right on time, Lisa having to go, we are going to adjourn. It is 9:31. See you guys in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.